Hello and welcome to another TMRN, Time Monk Radio Network production. I'm Jules and today is Saturday, the 7th of April 2012. Today, returning to the show is Teleste, John Lash. John is a self-educated freelance scholar who combines studies and experimental mysticism to teach directive mythology. John's recent work involves the direction of Gaia's navigation experiment and its impact on the future of humanity. Hi, John. Welcome to a roundtable discussion on the Time Monk Radio Network.
Good evening. It's good to be with you again.
It's good for us to have you here today. The administrator and executive producer of the show is Fox, and today he will be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members were kind enough to join us tonight. Please welcome Andromeda, Chipperdog, Green Meadow, and Uranus Rising. This interview will be available for free on timemonkradio.com and on YouTube at the Time Monk Radio channel. For listeners, this interview will concentrate on the talks posted on gaiaspora.org, such as the upcoming Gnostic protest against procreation, course correction, navigating chaos, and other matters central to GNE, or the Gaia Navigation Experiment. John's websites are gaiaspora.org, and his earlier works are available at metahistory.org. John, are you ready for the discussion, sir?
Indeed I am.
Fantastic. The first area of topic we would like to discuss with you is changing roles, and our first question is from Uranus Rising.
Hi, John. Would you take some time and explain to us what is Gaian divination science, and how do you translate this to your job as the navigator of this Gaian navigation experiment?
Well, I was reading your notes, of course, before the talk, and I saw this question at the head of the interview. I was a little surprised because I don't know if I've used the term Gaian divination science. I'm not aware that I've used that term. Did you pick that up from me?
Yes, I did, actually. I wouldn't make that up.
Really? Yeah, it sounded like a serious term, all right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes, it is a serious term.
Yeah. I guess I'll have to make up something to explain what I was talking about.
Okay.
The Gaia navigation experiment involves certain kinds of divination, and so I would include the arts of divination in the navigation experiment. As far as there being particular Gaian navigation, see, I don't understand the term, Gaian divination sciences. Well, what is that? In the practice of planetary tantra, we use the lunar cycles. We observe the lunar cycles each month, but in a particular manner that is not exactly the same way they have been used, say, in Wiccan practices or in other spiritual traditions that have observed the moon. Although it is close to the Hindu or Dravidian practices of observing the moon. So you could call that divination. I mean, looking at the sunset crescent, following the apogee and perigee of the moon, you could call those acts of divination. But I think that I would feel comfortable, because I was kind of thrown off by that term, honestly. I would feel comfortable in saying that divination simply means attunement to the moment, living in the present, and living with the synchronicity of all events that is revealed through signs and omens. This may be anything from a flight of birds to the angle of the moon relative to the surrounding stars. It simply means a heightened state of observation. Of course, on the other hand, you would all know that divination is an art that belongs to the shamanic tradition, which is the most ancient spiritual path on the planet. It is the spirituality at the base of all indigenous cultures. And so those of anyone who's familiar with shamanism will likewise have some understanding of the divinatory arts. Of course, the most famous example in mythology, or one of the most well-known examples, I should say, of divination science is the story of Woden, the Nordic shaman who hung on the world tree for 9 long windy nights. And during those 9 nights, hanging in the tree, in the tree of the world, which is where the shaman goes to learn, he received the Fimbal songs, as they're called. Fimbal songs are runes, which were like mantric formulas. And by repeating those mantric formulas, he could achieve various kinds of magic. So that's a general view of divination. The way that divination unfolds in the Gaian navigation experiment is, of course, a more specific subject. So did you want me to talk about that as well?
Yeah. Oh, I'd love for you to talk about that.
Okay, well, I had a feeling that this conversation, this is our 3rd or 4th, isn't it?
It's our 3rd, I think. Yes, 3rd.
Yeah, 3rd, I think, yeah. I had a feeling that it was going to be concentrating on the Gaian navigation experiment. So I'm very grateful to have an opportunity to explain once again what this is. The name of Joseph Campbell is often associated with me in a certain manner, simply because he was a comparative mythologist, very well known, world renown actually, and along with Mircea Eliade, was one of the only people who ever reached that level, that summit of comparative mythology. It's a rare calling. Most mythologists are highly specialized. They concentrate on one particular area, but a comparative mythologist looks at the entire inventory of myths. And so I, at some point in life, defined myself in that way as well, although I don't have the academic background, or I don't teach in university. I more or less teach to the public in sort of like what I'm doing now. And I've considered that my work is a follow-up and an extension of Joseph Campbell. And this is particularly true of the Gaian navigation experiment. So let me just take a quick moment to explain how. There was a massive output of writings from Joseph Campbell, as I'm sure you know. And he wrote these 4 volumes called The Masks of God.
Yes, I've got them all. I've got them all. First editions as well.
Marvelous, marvelous. Well, one of the thicker of those 4, they're all pretty big, is Creative Mythology. And there he goes extensively into the story of the Grail quest of Parzival. He also goes into the romantic myth of Tristan and Isolde. He talks about the 12th century. And he makes proposals in this book, Creative Mythology. He makes proposals. But I would like to point out that Joseph Campbell himself, up until his death in 1986, I think it was, never really applied the things that he proposed to do. Joseph Campbell was an academic. I'm not an academic. And Joseph Campbell was a professor at Sarah Lawrence College. And he had some theories about where you could go with mythology beyond the genre of mere scholarship, you see, beyond the exercise of using myths to find meaning, or using, say, the myth of the labyrinth and Daedalus and the Cretan labyrinth, or the myth of Icarus, who took wings and glued them to his body and flew close to the sun and fell to the earth. We can always take these myths and interpret them in some way regarding life. And that is what Campbell did. That is what Eliade did. But that is not all you can do with myth. And Campbell, to his great credit, saw beyond that. He saw beyond his own genre.
Hmm.
And he proposed in creative mythology ways that you could actually live and apply myth, that you could use it as a directing force in life, and you could experiment with it. And that's what I do. So I have taken the prerogatives that he set down as theoretical possibilities, and I'm suggesting how to actually apply them. And the supreme, I've done that in many ways through the last few years. Planetary Tantra is an example of that. Planetary Tantra is a living directive mythology. It's not something that you use to interpret life. You live inside the sacred narrative of the Sophia, and it actually directs your life. But it doesn't direct your life in the form of a belief or a dogma. You can't compare it to the way that the story of the Bible or the Quran or some other religious dogma directs people's lives. It doesn't direct your life by obedience, which is what those religious systems do. It directs your life by the joy and the discovery of your own creative imagination and the powers of your creative imagination. So creative mythology, which Campbell proposed, is an open source spirituality using the power of imagination. But what I understand as a comparative mythologist is something that perhaps Campbell himself didn't quite reach. It's interesting that Campbell, of course, talks now and then about the Gnostics, and he certainly knew the Gnostic materials and the Nag Hammadi writings, which came out in English about a decade before he was born. And Campbell may have glimpsed what I'm going to say now, but he did not elaborate on it very much. In order for anyone, any human being, to elaborate and explore and express the powers of their imagination, they need to do so within a narrative framework. Because the power of imagination is so strong that if it doesn't have a narrative, a directive myth to guide it, it goes all over the place. You might compare it crudely to a fire hose. You know, if you put a fire hose under your arm and hold it, the head of a fire hose, and then someone goes and turns on the water, you might find yourself thrown around by that fire hose.
Mm.
You see?
Yes.
And the imagination is like that. It's like if you just let your imagination play freely without having a guiding structure for it, then what you're going to come up with are maybe some brilliant hits and some brilliant misses. But at the end of the day, it will not cohere. It will not be coherent. And a lot of what the imagination produces is what I call fantasy material. That is to say, it's speculative, it's entertaining, but it cannot be tested. It's not veracious. So I've proposed the Gaia navigation experiment as a way to develop the creative mythology that Joseph Campbell was pointing to. And in this experiment, the directive framework is the myth of the fallen goddess scenario, as I call it, which is the myth of the Aeon Sophia, which comes down to us from Gnostic sources. So that's kind of the general orientation to what it is. The topic of correction, of course, is the key to what happens in the Gaia navigation experiment, and we'll probably pick up that in some of the remaining questions that we have, because they touch on the subject of correction.
Right. So as navigator, you're using the divination and imagination within the narrative framework of the fallen goddess.
That's right.
And that's how you're guiding this experiment. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. It's actually not
Okay.
me who guides. It's the fallen goddess scenario that guides.
Okay.
And I
Great.
just show people how to optimize that guiding power. I don't guide. It's not me. It's not my personal initiative or my personal ideas that are guiding the Gaia navigation experiment.
Mm. Well, great. Thank you very much for that explanation. It's very helpful.
Well, it's kind of an introduction.
Yes.
Good place to start.
It is. It is. Thank you.
And thank you, Uranus. The next question is from Green Meadow.
Hello, John.
Hi there.
My question is did the Gnostics have a method of inquiry? How did they approach a problem or mystery, and what can we take from their methods as modern groups try to co-create understandings and co-create solutions?
Well, they had a lot of methods. They had one primary method that was the supreme practice in the mystery schools, which was called divine mathesis, or instruction by the light. Now, this term instruction by the light is not of my invention. I want to point that out. This is not a speculation. This is not something that I have claimed that they did based on some fantasy I have about the past. The specifics, although they undertook a vow of silence about instruction by the light, some written record of it has survived from classical times. Certain people who were initiated into the mysteries did describe instruction by the light, and they used that exact language. It's found in a couple of places in the Nag Hammadi writings, particularly in the Discourse on the 8th and the 9th, and it's also found in a couple of Hermetic treatises that are related to Gnostic writings. So what was instruction by the light? Well, very simply, it was a method of shamanic trance that brought the teleste into the presence of the organic light. The organic light is a phenomenon of nature and of the supernatural at the same time. The organic light is the living, palpable, sentient, luminous presence of the goddess of fire. The Gnostics understood that when the Aeon Sophia plunged from the galactic core, she turned into the earth, turned into the material body of the earth, but she still retained her pleromic form. So at the center of the galaxy, of each galaxy, we're talking now about our galaxy, they understood by their heightened perception. They saw, they knew, they learned through heightened perception and verified this with each other over many years, that the aeons or gods at the center of our galaxy are like vast torrents of light. But that light, I must stress, is not immaterial. It's material. It's a substance, and it has the quality of, you could say, nougat, or marshmallow, or molten pearl. And Gnostics, in their practices over many generations, honed the ability to go to this light, to go to it, and bring themselves to it in a trance state of heightened awareness. And that was the central practice by which they learned. And then they brought to the light questions. They didn't just go to the organic light, which is present here on Earth. It permeates the Earth. They did not just go into the presence of the light randomly or for thrill-seeking, but they went with specific questions. And this is how they were able to hone their own educational process to a genius level. If you encounter the organic light, you learn things at a genius level. And they were geniuses, the teleste of the mysteries. They were geniuses, and then they applied the genius that they acquired from the divine Sophia, whose name means wisdom, and they turned around and educated other people. So it is sad, and sadly and pathetically, every single Gnostic scholar except myself ignores this fact. But it is clearly said in classical testimony and by some of the earliest and best scholars of Gnosticism that the Gnostics were the teachers and educators of the ancient world. So they had an inside-outside method, you see. There were things that they did and learned and shared among themselves in the mystery cells where they went into sessions of shamanic trance in groups. And they would do it with a specific purpose to explore something, some aspect of the cosmic order or some phenomenon of nature. For instance, they might go into a shamanic trance together in a mystery cell, a group of them, men and women, to learn what was the origin of water, and the properties of water. This way they learned all about the atmosphere and the elements of nature, and they also learned many things about the human mind because they were noetic scientists as well. But then they turned around and they applied what they knew to other people who came to the mystery schools to learn. And so the mystery schools had an external aspect, which was the campus. The campus of the mystery school consisted of workshops where people learned all kinds of things, like beekeeping, sacred dance, geometry. The Gnostics were responsible not only for teaching literacy, and I point out, very important fact that's often overlooked, that there was a high level of literacy in the ancient world before the Christian era. Many, many people, I would say all people, but a vast majority of people, including slaves, could read and write due to the educational system of the mystery schools. So they taught literacy, they taught logic, they taught rational thinking, they taught dialectic, such as you see in the case of Socrates. Most of the great known Greek philosophers who are attributed with presenting to us methods of thinking, methods of scientific inquiry, came out of the mysteries, and they admitted that was the case. One of the reasons that we have difficulty today grasping this, and one of the reasons why scholars balk on what I'm saying right now, it's very simple. You can go and look into Greek history of the Golden Age of Greece, and you could write down a list of maybe 10 names of well-known scientists and philosophers. But you cannot write down the name of any Telestes because they remained anonymous. Their goal was not to promote themselves, and there were no charismatic leaders among the Gnostics. The goal was to remain equal in regard to their dedication of learning from the divine Sophia and to teach and pass on what they knew in total anonymity. So this is why there were thousands of Gnostic teachers. We don't know the names of any of them because that was their choice, you see. And so they, those were their methods. They used the rational method of inquiry. They taught dialectic, which comes from the dianoia of the wisdom goddess. They taught metanoia, which is how to develop paradigms, how to think. And they taught many practical things, from navigation to jewelry making,
So can modern people interact with the organic light, or does that take years of skill to develop, or are
Modern
those
people-
practices beyond
modern
us?
people-
Yeah.
No, they're not beyond us. I do them all the time. And other people I know, a few other people I know, have done them with me. Uh, I would say that you elect yourself into divine gnosis, and it happens one person at a time. I don't see gnosis or the mysteries being revived in some group events in our time or in the near future. That's just my personal fix on it. I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Were you to decide that you would like to encounter the organic light, well, that's probably one of the more important decisions that you would ever make in your life. And then you would go about doing that by using the aid of a teacher plant or a psychoactive substance, because it's much easier to do it in that way. It is possible to see the organic light without that, and I've done it. But if you want to see it deliberately, that's the way to do it. And the operative word is deliberate. You want to be able to deliberately go and see it. You just don't want to be vague and, maybe you had an experience and you've seen the organic light. People have. That's, But the point is, if you want to see it systematically, that's a choice that you make, and that's a big choice to make. And it's a big commitment. And then, see, the difference today is that it's more or less of a solitary path, because we don't have the structure of the mystery schools to support that activity. It used to be done in a systematic way, and there used to be group support for it, which there isn't now. So it would unfold in quite a different way now. But the experience of encountering the organic light is essentially the same as it was in their time.
Okay. And then
it's also very beautiful, by the way. It's also extremely beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Then my other question is that you've said that the basis of the original Sophianic myth came from the mystery seers that worked in groups of 16, and
right.
The 16 worked to cross-reference their visions. They were aware that errors could be made, and groups were better than individuals to discern reality, but also that groups vary greatly. A charismatic leader can be extremely powerful as an individual. So how did the Gnostics create healthy groups of 8 men and 8 women? What were some of the components of a healthy group? And did each person have different roles, or what can you tell us about that?
Well, these mystery cells were very flexible. They were basically divided into 8 and 8, because in a mystery group of 16, 8 of the people over a period of time, sometimes generally about for 2 years at a time, 8 of the people would belong to the inner petals, as they were called, and 8 others to the outer petals. So the 8 who belonged to the inner petals, this was their system that enabled them to manage the immense inpouring of knowledge that you receive from the organic light. You need a system to manage it. Those who belong to the inner petals, 4 men and 4 women, would do trance sessions together. Charismatic leaders were not allowed. The leader of any group session was chosen by lots, simply by pulling straws. No one was allowed to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't allowed. It was something that the group wouldn't accept, and they had an understanding of that. So that's why there was no hierarchy, and they left it to chance who would lead a certain session or not. So that was an essential part of their method. Another key part of their method was that the intensive work that was done by the 8 of the inner petals, a lot of it could not be shared externally. For instance, if I do a shamanic session and go to the organic light, and spend 4 or 5 hours absorbed in the organic light, I can turn around and bring back to the world or express or communicate or convey about, a fifth of that, 20%. That would be good. If I could turn around and share a fifth of what I received. There's a huge abundance of riches in this process. And so the group of 8 would then decide among themselves in briefings and debriefings from these sessions, what were the highlights that they learned that ought to be then turned around to the 8 who were managing the outer petals. And so they would have meetings, and they would individually, one-on-one, and as a group, they would say, we're exploring this now. For the last 6 months, we've been exploring this in our intensive trance sessions with the organic light, the Sophianic light. And it would be wonderful if you could take these aspects of what we've learned and bring them out into the world and bring them to the schools, bring them to the university, bring them to the Library of Alexandria, put them in your books and disseminate them. So that a very particular system that worked kind of was hinged in that way between the intensive inner work they did and the outer work. They were highly disciplined people, and they enjoyed their discipline. They were not rigid. They enjoyed the discipline of teaching, and they kept themselves in a, let's say, they preserved the integrity of the mystery cell by certain rituals of common celebration, and among those were dancing. There was a lot of dance. There was a lot of partying, actually. And the partying was the hedonistic side of the mysteries. But it wasn't hedonism as we'd understand it today. It wasn't just a shallow search for pleasure. It was very, in a way, reverential. Although it didn't take itself all that seriously. But there's enormous pleasure in the heightening of the erotic and hedonistic capacities that comes from this kind of work, that comes from this practice with the organic light. And I would say that quality, by maintaining that hedonistic and erotic quality, that alone took care of a lot of the problems that would normally arise in a group. They also had sexual practices, some of which are quite notorious and have been reported by people like Epiphanius, who was a young punk who decided to infiltrate one of the Gnostic cells, got a bit more than he bargained for when he saw what their sexual practices were. Their sexual practices were used for immunity from psychic influences, particularly from the archons and other psychic parasites, and to build up the beauty and stamina of the body. So they had a total body-mind system going. It was really a magnificent achievement. Although the mysteries were totally destroyed and almost all evidence of them was removed, it's tragic because what was achieved in the mysteries was one of the highest expressions of human potential on this planet.
Yeah, the way you describe the group is with the rotating leadership, and it sounds like a tremendous trust was built in the group and working together on coming to knowledge and to sharing knowledge. Boy, I wish we had more of that. The way we're doing it now is not working.
No, our system of education now has no resemblance to this, you see. But you see, they loved to learn. They loved the learning process, and they were in love with knowledge. And, of course, the central deity, central divinity of their movement was the wisdom goddess. And she's not called a wisdom goddess for nothing. You know, she's a teacher. She's my teacher. And I can tell you specifically what she teaches me, and I hope that I'm conveying this picture well, because I just want to add this caveat. It may seem somewhat vague what I'm saying, but in practice it's anything but vague. For instance, when I myself started to interact with the organic light here in Spain upon Infinity Ridge about 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, I found my way, as it were, back into this practice. And I can assure you that the things that I learned are extremely specific. For instance, I came to realize about 4 years ago, let's say around 2008, when I received the term of Gaia Awakening, that I would be handled by the wisdom goddess in a specific manner. She handles you, and she tells you exactly how she's going to do that. And I understood that I would be handled in such a way that she would, well, you can't use the word personally because it doesn't make any sense, but that she would focus specifically on teaching me 3 things. Just 3 things. But these things are so immense that in the process of learning them, all kinds of other things come to be known, you see. So I don't know if I'm conveying the richness and the complexity of this process, but that's how it is.
Yeah, I think you are actually.
Oh, good.
Are those 3 things something you can share, or?
Sure. She told me how she said that she would teach me to cast 3 spells, do spells, to do magic. Now, this magic that I do in Planetary Tantra is I must stress this, it's interactive magic, meaning that I do it with her. I don't do it by myself. In Planetary Tantra, which is in a way a kind of rediscovery of the mystery school practices, you cannot do anything by yourself. You use the power of the earth, and you use the infernal telluric powers of the divine Mother Shakti for the magic that you do. So it's not a power trip in magic, it's a power sharing of magic, okay? So she told me she would teach me to cast 3 spells. The first one was how to cast love spells, and she taught me that in 2007, in 2008. Then she said, I will teach you how to cast death spells. And she taught me that over several years and more or less completed that last summer. That is how to cast spells to kill. And then she said she would teach me a 3rd spell. I can't tell you what that is right now, because that's in progress, and I wouldn't be proper to speak about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. That's given me some inspiring information about how the Gnostics were doing things. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Hi, John. It's Uranus Rising again. My next question is about your latest version of your Sophianic vision and the mythos. Some seem to feel that you've developed in a different avenue from your original work about the fallen goddess. Many perceive that we are moving away from any one person holding a truth, but rather that now a group of individuals or peers will hold different facets of the diamond of truth. This seems contradictory to a sole individual working as the navigator, even though you are working, obviously, in co-creation with Sophia Gaia in the experiment. So I think we're just wondering, Are we correct in assuming that you're working alone, or do you work with a group, a balanced gendered group, to cross-reference and validate your visions? How are you doing it, in other words, compared to the original Gnostics?
Well, as far as I know, I'm doing it the way they did it, consistent with their method. There has been some misperception about this, and I welcome the opportunity to clear it up. So here goes. I don't know about this metaphor of the diamond of truth, and everyone has a facet. I'm really not very impressed by that metaphor. That may be the case with some things in life. It may be the case with many things. You know, for instance, look at the 9/11 events, or look at the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Who knows the whole story, you know? Many people have investigated 9/11, and let's say that there are hundreds of people that hold some part of the truth of that event. So in that case, the many-faceted diamond of truth might apply. It might apply in many areas of life. I wouldn't deny that. But it does not apply to the supreme guiding narrative for humanity. I've said before that it's not me, it's the story. And people don't get that. Just because the story comes through me, first of all, I'm not the author of the story. I hope you know that. I did reconstruct it in 9 episodes. No other Gnostic scholar has done that, and I call that FGS 1.0. So FGS 1.0 is the first reconstructed version of the Sophianic story. Now I'm working at 2.0. 2.0 is elaboration of that story from within the frame of the story. Okay, so to answer your question, I have 2 responses. The first response is that, yes, I am working on 2.0, not changing the story, not embellishing it with fantasy material, not bringing in anything in that is extraneous, but carefully unfolding and in developing the story, expanding the story on its own terms, testing it on its own terms. And this is what I call observing the frame of the story, and I talk about this a lot. If you observe the frame of this story and stay inside the plot line, it will show you things and tell you things that are incomparable, that nothing else on this earth can do for you, because it is the only story we have that is a complete and coherent narrative of the earth and of the origin of humanity. There is no other. And speaking as a comparative mythologist who's examined hundreds and hundreds of myths, I can tell you on the best of my knowledge that this is the case. Yes, I do that with other people. Not a lot of people, but there are like 350 people signed up to the Gaia Navigation Experiment. And out of that 350, we are all dedicated to observing this story. We don't bring in fantasy material. We don't pop in something about, you know, what's happening on Lyra or channelings from the Pleiades. No, don't do that.
Thank goodness.
We rigorously follow the story, but it's not a rigid process. It's something that you can only do this. I can't persuade anyone to do this, by the way, and I wouldn't try. But you only do it when the story gets a hold on you. And I have to say, this story has a way of getting a hold on you. And when it does, and it takes off, then you see what I mean. Now, the final point I want to make, and this is so important, and I'm grateful to your question to give me the opportunity to make this point. I'm an egalitarian person. I'm not an authority figure. I have never wanted to be a guru. As a matter of fact, if you ask people who've known me for the last 40 years, they'll probably tell you some dicey anecdotes. Could tell you some dicey anecdotes about how I made damn sure that I wasn't going to be somebody's guru. You know? I have no desire to lead anyone. I have no desire to lay down the law. I do not sing like Frank Sinatra. It's my way or the highway. But I swear to you that the Sophianic Vision story is held by each one of us in its entirety and not in pieces. So the Sophianic Vision story is not a many-faceted diamond of truth. It is a holographic plate. And if you break that holographic plate, you hold one piece of the plate, I hold another, and we both look at the little pieces that we hold, and what do we see? The entire image on the entire plate. In the Sophianic practice, everyone holds the complete story. And that is why it's so powerful, because it gives confidence and direction to the imagination like nothing else can. So while I'm not, I'm as wary as anyone else in this world about someone coming up and saying, this is the only truth and so forth and so on. Well, this is the only complete and coherent myth of planetary evolution for the Earth. Period. That's just a fact. And so those who embrace the story embrace it in its totality, and that's how it works.
Thank you for that, John. I hope, because I know there's been a lot of confusion lately, and I hope this has been an opportunity for you to clarify your position. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And as I am expanding the myth, like we're in correction right now, the myth is open-ended, by the way. The Sophianic myth has no ending. It doesn't have a final chapter. It's not like the biblical myth of the apocalypse. Even Sophia doesn't know how it's going to work out, Is the divine Sophia going to be able to turn around our experiment in the next 11 minutes of her day, which is the next 208 years of human time? I don't know, and neither does she. We'll know when it happens, you see? So it's completely open. I'm not dictating how it's going to turn out, but I am developing new threads of the weave. And as I do so, I do collaborate with other people. I do discuss it with them. I draw on their input. Others who are living in the story provide the threads that go into the continued weaving of the story. So I am not some solitary mastermind out here telling anyone where this story is going by myself. Although it looks that way, I can understand how it might. But that's not the case, folks. Honestly, it isn't. Yeah. Okay?
Good. And
Good.
It would be a very lonely path to do it by oneself anyway. So thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Hi, John. I have a question about hierarchy and patriarchy, and the traditional family structures seem to be breaking down.
Yeah.
It seems like new social structures are trying to develop, and any organization needs to be effective at meeting the needs of its members, and hierarchy is becoming less effective at that.
Yeah.
What do you think will replace these top-down types of organizations?
Anarchy. Pure anarchy. You know what anarchy means? It's very interesting, the word anarchy, because it has the word archon in it. You know that? It's a Greek word.
Okay.
Now, this word archon is the word found lavishly in Gnostic writings, and it means the rulers of the authorities. It applies not only to any people in society who would think that they can hold authority over others and rule them. In other words, power-tripping control freaks are archons. But it also applies, it has other dimensional meanings as well, as you know, because they detected that there was an extraterrestrial archontic presence. So there are two aspects of the archons: the mind parasite ET extraterrestrial archonic presence, which is very dangerous. And then there is just the human archons, the rulers, the authorities, the feds, the banksters, the people who walk around in society telling other people how they have to live. Those people are archons. Now look at the word anarchy. It's from exactly the same root, but you break it down into an, which means without, like anaerobic means without air, and archy means without archons. Okay. The only kind of survival society that's going to survive in the future is a non-authoritarian society. So let's start thinking about how to have that.
Yeah, you're just in listening to what we've been talking about, your description of how the Gnostic groups function was very not hierarchy. And then I look at how the perception got put on you that you're trying to put yourself at the top, possibly. That people only know how to see things that way. And it's like we need to change our doing and our vision.
Well, yeah, and people who have that perception of me need to change their attitude too. Because nobody comes to me and tells me that, by the way. I hear that third party. Why doesn't somebody come to me and tell me that? You can call me up on Skype. Anybody in the world wants to talk to me on Skype who thinks I have an authoritarian complex, I invite you to call me. Write me at jll@metahistory.org or navigator@metahistory.org. Introduce yourself. Tell me your gripe about my perceived authoritarianism. I'll give you my Skype name and we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Nobody I hear this all the time now. I'm really,
wow.
I hear this not all the time, but I hear this often that people have this perception of me among themselves, but they're not telling me what their perception of me is. You see? Well, why not? They're afraid to challenge me? What do you think I'm going to do? So be fair to me. If you have this perception of me, if you think that I'm trying to set myself up in some pyramidal structure or some master guru role, then come to me directly and have the decency and the honesty to talk to me about it face to face.
Yeah, no, I think people should. But actually,
Yeah.
my point is that we look for leaders. We look to place people in hierarchies. And even when, like in your case, you're not wanting to be in a hierarchy. And that needs to go just as well as people trying to be in power. Trying to be in power or trying to place someone in power.
They two go together, don't they? The two go together.
They're both problems, yeah.
Yeah, the people trying to place me in power when I don't even want to be in power. I've been facing this problem for a long time, I have stood out, like back in Santa Fe, for instance, I taught classes and I was a practicing astrologer and whatever. And there was John Lash wandering around Santa Fe back in the 70s, the early 80s. And okay, I stood out at that time in that social scene. Why? Because I had certain knowledge. I was a teacher. And people valued my knowledge. Quite often, people came to me and tried to set me up as being more than a teacher. And I used the analogy at that time of crutches. And I warned people. And I said, don't come to me on crutches when you can walk without them. And don't ask me to give you a crutch when all I want to do is dance with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I've been practicing this for a long time, and I feel confident that maybe I'm deluding myself. Maybe I am just an egomaniac and I don't see it. It's possible,
Yeah.
But I have been kicking crutches out from under people for quite a while, my friends. So
yeah, it's this breakdown of hierarchy is probably not going to be simple, but it does seem to be happening.
Oh yeah, it's happening massively, and patriarchy is crushing. Is crushing itself under the weight of its own absurdity. It's all coming down, and the question is, we're all wondering, what's going to be the form of organization of society when it all comes down. Well, I think it's going to be tribal, communal, a society of anarchy, of free agreement among individuals, but there have to be criteria and rules. Not rules, there have to be standards, excuse me. Criteria and standards. And by that I mean a group of people would be united, not by a leader or a charismatic person, but they would be united by an objective standard. For instance, their respect for personal freedom, their respect for the natural world. You know, respect is an important part of building the new communities, and respect for freedom is, of course, central to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I look forward to it.
So do I.
Yeah. So my next question is, the pendulum seems to swing between patriarchy and matriarchy, and each can abuse power. There does seem to be a perception that the feminine is less likely to abuse power. But with the rise of this Sophia myth, and the feminine seems to be returning, how do we keep from demonizing or abusing the male as the feminine returns?
Well, lately, in the context of the Gaia navigation experiment, I've been talking out of both sides of my mouth at once, okay? Out of the right side of my mouth, I'm talking about how the Aeon Sophia, in her planetary embodiment, is achieving correction, and what correction means for her on her own terms. And that would be, it literally means freedom from the capture of the planetary system and the ability to navigate the Earth according to her own, by self-propulsion and self-navigation. You see? This is actually what correction means for the planetary wisdom goddess. Out of the left side of her mouth, I'm talking about what is the human role in correction. What we can be doing to align ourselves and accord ourselves with the massive process of correction that she is making in her own terms on the planetary level. What can we do in the human personal level as a correlation to that? And what I'm coming up with, and this is happening in dialogue with people to some extent, what I'm coming up with is healing the gender rift and healing the war between the sexes, and so that men and women don't use each other anymore. If men and women as individuals don't use each other, then the ills of patriarchy and the ills of matriarchy can't get started. They can't grow because the initial conditions are not given. So let's learn from history what was wrong with patriarchy. Let's learn as well what was wrong with matriarchy. And let's not provide the initial conditions in which those cancers can develop, you see. So the healing of the gender rift is the important thing. Been talking about that a lot with Suzanne Toro lately, going into detail. The role of women in Gaia's correction is immensely important, as they are teachers and they bring inspiration and trust, connecting the social group to Sophia. Women do that. Men, in turn, are involved in the warrior approach, although not all warriors are men. Some great warriors are women too. But we recognize each other in these new roles, honor each other in these roles, and we won't fall back into the syndromes of patriarchy and matriarchy. It's a big subject, yeah.
So when you say we need to not use each other, what do you mean by that?
Well, just look at what happened. Look at personal relationships. Codependency is often mistaken for love. Codependency is a way in which you enhance your reality through the reality of another person by using them in order to make yourself feel better, in order to make yourself feel powerful. And it often disguises itself as love, but it's not love. The ways that men and women use each other are multifold and devious, but primarily men use women as a kind of measure of reward, and women use men as a kind of measure of possession. And these kind of relationships feed on each other because they don't have a third point of reference. I'm really convinced that male-female relations, gender relations, can be absolutely transformed by putting in a third point, by triangulating it. And that third point is the earth. For instance, sex. A really good sexual relationship has three people in it. A man, a woman, and the earth. And so that changes the dynamic entirely. When we ground our emotional and sexual energies into the earth, we come to each other recognizing that we have that grounding, then we treat each other in a different way. There's a lot to be done here. I think there's a lot of, to me, the most promising thing that's happening right now in the breakdown of society is that it allows the freedom for these new kinds of relationships to emerge.
Will that help foster strength and compassion within all peoples regardless of gender, do you think?
No, absolutely not. And the idea of fostering strength and compassion in people is not an idea that I support. I think it's delusional.
So what do we need to foster? What do we need to foster?
People?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, foster in people? I don't know. I don't foster anything in people. I don't understand that question. How can you foster compassion in another person? It completely escapes me. I don't know what you're talking about. Honestly.
Okay.
Maybe it's just the language that's tripping me up.
I guess, like when you're with a child and they do something cruel to someone, and you explain to them how that's cruel, and you explain to them compassion. Sometimes they can understand, sometimes they can't. Or with each other. There's this wish that if we could just explain, there won't be a war,
Yeah, I think that's delusional. I think that even teaching this thing about the appeal to love is completely delusional. The reason why is because if you already have love, you don't need to be preached about love. And if you don't have it, no amount of preaching is going to make any difference.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome.
John?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, just a quick question. You discussed in one of your talks that most stories of teachers are males. Shakyamuni, Buddha, Confucius, Patanjali, Rishiba, and the 24 Tirthakantras of Jainism, Yogendra, etc., Jesus. And if you look at martial art history, most teachers are male teachers developing ki or chi for their male students through the Dantian. Interestingly, though, many ancient god myths are of the feminine. But that aside, my question is the role of males versus females in these upcoming times. Some people took offense on, not myself, but some, on your recent comment on the female role as hetera or courtesans. Could you elaborate on what you think the role of the female and male is in Gaia's correction? My opinion is, though males and females are equal, this does not mean that male and females are the same and are supposed to do the same role in life. An example I often give is women give birth, not males. Can you elaborate and clarify what you mean by women as hetera and what the role of a man and a woman is in the Gnostic philosophy?
Hetera is a term that came up recently, quite spontaneously, in the a navigation experiment. And it came up because I was contemplating an event in the sky along with the other members of the experiment, certainly not by myself. As I said in a recent talk, about half the time I'm not by myself when I discover or realize certain elements of the Sophianic myth, or when I discover or realize or reach a new understanding of this practice. I'm not by myself. I do it in a synergy, in the presence of another person, usually a woman. And this came up recently as I was contemplating the Venus-Jupiter conjunction in the sky and the way that Venus then moves on to the Pleiades, where it was just a few days ago. Quite a magnificent sight. I can understand why, perhaps, some people might be put off by the notion of the Hetaira as, quote, courtesan, end quote. Oh, courtesan, what's that? It's a woman who's just a sex object and just is there for the pleasure of men. Well, if that's what you think a courtesan is, then you have good reason to be put off. But that is not what I mean when I use the word Hetaira. There is a very, very hard lesson facing humanity today. And I'm going to put it to you brutally, really brutally, because it's the only way I can get it out. And it's the way that she puts it to me. Kali, I mean. If you can't admit that it would be a thrill to kill someone, then you better step back into the other ranks, because that admission is what puts you in the forefront of humanity's challenge today. Now, let me just try to elaborate this for a moment, because this is not easy. I've never tried to say this before. The problem on this planet is due to the presence of psychopaths. I've talked about this a lot. I've also said that in the framework of the understanding of the Gnostics, the reason why we have psychopaths, dangerous psychopaths running around on this earth, screwing up society, looting the planet, deceiving and murdering other people or having the murders done for them on a mass scale. The reason why we have this disaster is because we're not intended to be born mitotically through the pelvis of a woman. And so there is a large extent of damage that occurs to the cranial and spinal nerves at the back of the neck due to childbirth. This is my explanation of why we have psychopaths. It's a side effect of the birth process. But some people aren't going to like that, but can't do anything about that. Now, these psychopaths are murderous. They're insane and they're murderous. And they enjoy murder and mayhem. Who's going to stand up to them? Well, the only people that can stand up to them in the front rank are people who find it possible to accept two things. One, that they would be willing to, what's worth doing is worth dying for. Be willing to risk your life and to frontally go against the psychopaths. They have to be taken down. They're not going to stop. If you think they're going to stop, they're going to reform, we're going to bring them to justice, we're going to put them all in jail, or some of them are going to change their minds, that's all bullshit. They're not going to stop. They can't stop. They're insane. They're addicted to power. And the only way that they can be stopped is to eliminate them. Now, what does this have to do with Hetaira? It has a lot to do with Hetaira and the role of women. Because you see, anyone who would undertake the war on the psychopaths, to actually take them down physically, has to admit that it would be a pleasure to do so. A pleasure. It's a thrill to kill. And this is evident all through nature. Now, this may seem outrageous and unacceptable to people that I would say this, but it's a fact. Psychopaths get a thrill out of killing. Well, why can't I get a thrill out of killing them? Two can play at that game. But this thrill of killing, which is innate to our species, and if you can't admit it, go to some other planet where they don't have a food chain and where they don't have predatory animals. We were put on this planet in this experiment with predatory animals for a reason by the divine Sophia. She didn't put us on a vegetarian planet. And we learned from the predatory animals, and we learned from the food chain what it means to kill with respect. As you see, for instance, in the film Avatar, this is the first thing that Neytiri shows Jake. This is known to all indigenous peoples. We've forgotten this wisdom, and it applies as well to the killing of psychopaths. Now, let me get to the punchline. If it's a pleasure to kill, then the sense of pleasure must be part of the discipline of killing. Heightened pleasure. Let me call it the art of pleasure. The Hetaira is a woman who teaches and embodies the art of pleasure. She is not a sex object for men and some kind of Playboy doll or penthouse trophy wife. She is a warrior woman and the counterpart to the male warrior who carries the instruction of the Sophianic mysteries and who holds pleasure as a high discipline. Because when you can experience very, very high levels of pleasure, erotic, sexual, and sensual pleasure, you can also walk the razor's edge of the warrior's discipline. Now, there's a paradigm already in place for this. There's a kind of, I wouldn't call it a paradigm, I should say, there's a kind of prelude to this that you can see in Japanese culture. If you go back and you look at the samurai, and there were women samurai as well, and women sword fighters. If you go back and you look at the path of the samurai, you find that two things were combined. One was that the samurai had exquisite warrior skills and took the responsibility to kill. And a samurai always killed a worthy adversary. Samurais did not go around terrorizing or harming or killing ordinary people or anyone who did not themselves have the ability to kill. But if you look into that tradition, you kind of get a glimpse also of the connection between pleasure and violence. Because part of the samurai tradition was shown by the way that people in that Japanese culture cultivated beauty. They observed the cherry blossoms. They observed the most exquisite details of nature. They wrote haiku about nature. And there was a heightened observation of the beauty of nature and the pleasures of the sensual world that went hand in hand with the warrior's calling. So this is what the Hetaira are. The Hetaira are not some, bimbos that are just used to gratify a man's selfish pleasure. Not at all. They are an essential component of the emergent Kalika tribes of the last 200 years of this Kalpa. And these Kalika tribes may be nothing now. It may just sound like a fantasy of John Lash. It may just be some sick thing that he's got going in his head. And I don't predict. But I can only tell you that I sense with every fiber of my being that these Kalika tribes, when they emerge, will be recognized in this way, and that they are the men and women in these Kalika tribes, in the tribes of the goddess Kali, will protect the societies that emerges after the breakdown of the one we're in now. Because we're going to need protection. It's all about protection. And protection is the joint work of men and women in the Kalika path. The protection not of humanity as a whole, because you can't save it. It's a goner. Most of it's gone. Most of it's die off. But to save that which can survive, to protect that which can survive, this is the role, and this is what the Tyra are, and they are no pushovers. I can guarantee you that. They're ruthless, and they're very, very tough.
Thanks,
So
John, for the
concept.
Well, thank you, John, for the clarification. It's, it's obviously an interesting question. When there has been a lot of feedback on that navigation for, I believe, when you talked about the Tara, but it's good that you clarified that. You are listening to John Lash. Please support his work by visiting his websites gaiaspora.org and metahistory.org. Okay, our next set of questions is from Andromeda.
Okay, John. Magic has been practiced worldwide in all pagan cultures for millennia. There is magic action when one performs a cording or a blood pact with the planet, as in the Tantra navigation. And this is not a new form of magic. Many Wiccans practice cordings too, and I must clarify here that they do also work with goddesses or gods. They don't work on their own. Also, tantric sex is also used to enhance that magic, either for practical reasons or the creation of the immortal body. My question is, why does there seem to be a discrepancy between your stated view in the past of being against magic and the ritual of use tantric force as contraviolence that you are proposing now?
Well, first of all, I'm going over your words. You said that Wiccans do cordings?
Yes, they do.
Well, I don't know that. I didn't know that. I've never had a Wiccan contact me on my site and say, oh, well, we do cordings like the ones that you're proposing. In fact, I've never had a Wiccan contact me at all.
Well,
that's interesting.
I have seen it done.
Oh, you have seen it done.
I have seen it done, and I have asked because I thought it was a person that perhaps was in the Gaia experiment as well. But no, it was nothing to do with that. Indeed, I have researched further, and I have found out that, the tradition of putting ribbons on trees is very ancient, and at least here in the British Islands, and many people do that to say thank you to the spirit of the tree, or when they are working with the spirit of the tree, and it's very ancient.
Yes, I know. Working with cord is one of the most ancient technologies on the planet. Cord is not only a technology that relates to society and has played a huge role in how society develops, how commerce develops. The use of cords for counting, for instance, among the Peruvians is an example. I am aware that the use of cord, is an ancient technology, certainly. The way that a cording is done, however, in Gaian Tantra is different and unique. Now, you say that you saw someone do a cording, a Wiccan, and that had nothing to do with a Gaian technique of cording. Well, that's possible. That's news to me. But I have never seen anyone do a courting in that way. So I also would be very cautious to conclude that the courting that you witnessed was similar to a Gaian courting. Have you ever seen anyone do a Gaian courting?
No, but I have done a couple myself.
Okay, good. Well, then you know what the technique is, and the technique is very specific. So do Wiccans use exactly the same technique?
In the sense that it is spontaneous and it's basically like a dance with a tree, yes.
Well, that's news to me.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've never heard that before.
Well, I asked because I found myself in a forest,
Mm-hmm.
and I witnessed unwittingly a situation like that, and I asked the person because obviously, to find somebody who is in the same kind of thing that you are doing is interesting, but I found out that it wasn't a person that didn't know anything about the Gaia navigation experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, I just got a different explanation for that, but, maybe the inspiration of that particular person, I don't know, but, she said that it's common.
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting instance. But as I said, over the years, I've been wondering why I haven't heard from any Wiccans. Because I thought that when I began to develop planetary Tantra, or when I began to put it out into the world in 2008, and did photographs of courtings, and now there's some clips, YouTube clips, describing how to do courtings and so forth, and other aspects of planetary Tantra that are compatible. I thought they were somewhat compatible with Wiccan pagan practices, but also somewhat different. And I was wondering if any Wiccans were ever going to give me the high sign and say, "Oh, hi, John, we're Wiccans over here, and gee, we're kind of like this planetary Tantra stuff because it's an earth magic, and we do earth magic, and maybe we should get together and trade some secrets and trade some stories and some knowledge." It's never happened.
I don't know. I am not particularly in Wiccan myself, but I know there is a lot of Wiccan people where I live, and very much so all across England or the UK. And I think it's people that keep themselves to themselves, really.
Yeah, well, that's probably so. And maybe that's why they haven't felt compelled to reach out to me. But I will say on this subject that as far as I know, the techniques of Gaian courting are very specific. They're simple and specific. It's not a complicated process. And they do differ in some ways from traditional forms of magic. So, as far as I know, and I'd be happy to discuss the subject with someone who would come forth, who practices magic, would come forth and like to compare skills with me. I'd be more than delighted to do that, but that hasn't happened.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Andromeda. The next question is from Chipperdog.
John, this is possibly getting off track a little bit, but recently Cliff High of the Webbots put out a talk discussing the practice of circumcision and its deleterious effects he sees regarding female-male interactions within their societal groupings. The premise being that hormonal exchange during coitus has been disrupted from what nature intended to be, and that has contributed to the control those instituting and perpetuating that practice try to impose. What is your opinion on the practice of circumcision and its ramifications?
Well, I think circumcision of women is a horror upon the planet, and it's a genital mutilation, really. And I think it's disgusting, and it's obviously used to control women. Some societies in Africa, they actually sew them up, or they cut off the clitoris, or so a woman can. It's ghastly. It's just the sick, ghastly madness that's rampant on this planet. That is a high example of it. As far as circumcision in men is concerned, I don't really know. It certainly must be painful to a young child, a young boy, to be circumcised. But what effect, what is the difference in sexual performance and sexual pleasure between a circumcised and uncircumcised men? I don't really know. I've not made that study. As far as what Cliff High is saying about how it inhibits the exchange of hormones or whatever, I don't know anything about that. I've never looked into that. All I know is that circumcision of women in any respect whatsoever is a horror and totally unacceptable. That's all I know.
Yeah. Well, what you were saying about pleasure being a highly motivating energy, I can see possibly that circumcision would try to put pleasure out of consideration. And
well, sure, exactly. You mean that would be the purpose of it? Which is what Cliff High is suggesting, that the purpose of it was to reduce pleasure and therefore disempower people.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. And, recently I've been talking a lot with one of my allies in the Gaia Navigation Experiment and a great planetary tantrika, my companion Kundri. And she's right now reading The Function of the Orgasm by Wilhelm Reich. I would suggest that everyone read this book.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Wilhelm Reich talks about is pleasure anxiety. And this is a really important concept that has not been as widely discussed as it should be, because it was a discovery that Reich made, and it's a brilliant piece of information. We think, pleasure. Well, pleasure means feeling good, and pleasure is something that you want, isn't it? You want pleasure, don't you? Well, no. There are people who don't want pleasure. They have what is called pleasure anxiety. And pleasure anxiety is a functional disorder of the sexual energies of a person, primarily of the sexual and amative energies. And the result of pleasure anxiety is that a person is afraid to feel the physical pleasure of their own body. But that in itself becomes a pleasure. It's really perverse. So repressing the pleasure of the body itself becomes a pleasure to these people. And Reich points out that these people who are suffering from pleasure anxiety are very dangerous, because they will go around and repress the pleasure that other people naturally seek. So they will act in a deleterious and controlling manner upon people who don't have pleasure anxiety, you see?
Yeah,
and I think this whole circumcision thing would fit into that picture quite well, don't you?
I do.
Yeah.
It would also fit into the Abrahamic mindset of a high degree of control over all sorts of expression.
Indeed it would. They're terrified of pleasure, these people, these controllers, and particularly these religious fanatics, whether it be a raging imam or ayatollah,
Right.
Spewing hatred, or some Jewish rabbi, or some Christian fundamentalist, or recently like Rick Santorum, it's like a war on porn, why is he warring on porn? Well, draw your own conclusions.
Yeah. You've also said often how important it is to remain true to the Sophianic myth. In your work and as a mythologist, you often use other mythologies such as the Hindu and Buddhist, or even the works of Carlos Castaneda. For instance, recently you've posted on your site information about Kalki from the Hindu tradition. You describe him as the male warrior aspect of Kali, a Hindu deity who represents the wrath of the cosmic Shakti or Divine Mother. Sometimes this can be confusing or even contradictory, and I wonder if you could explain your methodology so that we can better understand your work.
I'd love to. This is one of the things that I really enjoy doing because I think I'm pretty good at it. And I really feel proud of how I have taken creative mythology into a new level of practice. And the method is a beauty to understand in itself. The method is beautiful. As I said earlier, I have examined all the myths all around the world of every culture in the course of my life. And to my knowledge, there is only one myth that presents a complete and coherent story of the evolution of humanity, the origin of the planet Earth, the status of the planet Earth in relation to the solar system, in relation to the galaxy, the nature of the genetic makeup of humanity, the calibration of the human genome, the presence of extraterrestrial mind parasites in human reality, the origin of theocracy, the origin of the Abrahamic religions, which suppress the natural genius, beauty, power, and pleasure of our species. I guarantee you there is no other myth anywhere in the world that contains that package deal. And it gets better. The more you observe the myth, stay in the framework of the story, elaborate the story consistent with the plot line, the more beautiful, coherent, and self-evident it becomes. And I'm not the only one who would attest to this. People in the Gaian Navigation Experiment write me often, sometimes several times a month. And I know that there are some people out there among the 350 crew members who would speak exactly as I speak now. That this myth is veracious and self-verifying, and it is unique. Having said that, however, it does not preclude the consideration of other myths, because other myths are also a record of the phylogenetic evolution of our species. Other myths also contain clues and elements. It's just that there is no other myth that coherently gives us the whole picture, right. You see.
Yeah.
So we get fragments of very, very crucial fragments and glimpses of our evolution, of Sophia's daring experiment, Wisdom's Dare. We get glimpses of it from many indigenous cultures and from classical myths, whether they be Greek, Roman, or Hindu mythology.
Right.
Now, recently, I was investigating in a shamanic trance some episodes of FGS 1.0. Because FGS 1.0 is that version of the Sophianic narrative that I reconstructed as the starting version, the operating system. It's like MS-DOS 1.0.
Right.
Now we're going to 2.0. I do that. How do I do that? With extreme care.
Very carefully.
I verify it by repeated encounters with the organic light. I verify it by discussions with other people who are observing the story. I verify it by looking for other correlative and parallel mythological material that could be drawn into the open source material of the Sophianic myth and integrated. And I made a most astonishing discovery regarding the myth of the 10 avatars of Vishnu. And that was that prior to the experiment that we are in now, which I call Anthropos 10, Sophia, who engineered the Anthropos, observed 9 previous experiments with our genetic plasm. And all of these failed catastrophically. And what I observed by going back into her memory, because one of the things that I do in the Gaia navigation experiment, and it's true that only I do this for right now, I am doing this, let's say, methodically, okay?
Right.
But other members of the crew are doing it sporadically and intuitively. But I know how to do it methodically because I've been practicing it for a long time.
Right.
But the method that I follow, you can do as well. But right now, I'm a little ahead of the game in that respect. Okay, so what I discovered by methodically investigating what happened. How do I do this? I follow her memory as she herself recalls it. So what's happening right now in correction is that there's a 3-year period from March 2011 to March 2014 when the Divine Sophia, the living intelligence of the earth, is recalling her own biography, her own cosmic life story. She's recapitulating it as a sorcerer recapitulates.
Mm-hmm.
And by following the astronomical element of the transit of the apogee of the moon through the constellations, I can know, by decoding that, I can know what she's remembering at each moment. And so if I go into a shamanic session on the 4th of January, 2012, and then I go into another shamanic session on the 8th of March, 2012, I do this with a deliberate intent to follow her memory in real time at that moment. Because what she recalls in January is one thing, what she recalls in March is another thing, what she will be recalling in July, August, and September is yet again something else. And I can go in and observe what she's recalling in real time. And I did this to observe when she was recalling what happened before her plunge. And I saw that in episode 4 of the 1.0 version that it had to be amplified now, because episode 4 now includes her observation of these 9 previous experiments. She was very disturbed because she and Thelete had engineered this protoplasmic DNA matrix. And then when they saw it behaving in a way that it turned against its own environment and was destructive to its environment, to its petri dish, they were very upset. And so she decided that she would take measures to change the experiment and put the human genome into a specific setting where it would be able to deal with its self-destructive tendencies. And that is our experiment. Number 10. We are Anthropos 10. So you see, this is an example of how I have taken another mythical structure and I have incorporated into the Sophianic mythos, but absolutely consistent with the plot line.
Yeah.
That is so wonderful. I love to do that. And the people who are doing that with me love it as well. It's so exciting and it's so powerful because the beauty of the story is in its veracity, in its self-validating veracity. And then when the story gets a hold of you like that, it starts to affect you in every aspect of your life.
Mm-hmm. That brings a thought to me. You know, you've talked about the organic light, and the way you described it sounded very similar to a phrase that I've used before, of a bright pearlescent mist. And it would seem that hard coding the bright pearlescent mist or the organic light, like it might take away some of the awe and the wonder of immersion in joy's beauty. Can there be a non-mythical understanding that we as humans can reach that will not depend on a story or a myth?
No,
No?
no,
Why is that?
It's impossible, because we're a storytelling species. Your NLP runs on story. The first stories are all hunting stories. Why? Because this is the way we are designed. We are designed so that our imaginations interact with nature, and the imaginative power of our minds, which is called a paranoia, builds events into a story. So, for instance, when hunters go out and they're looking for a deer, they walk into an arroyo and they see some deer tracks, and then they see some other tracks like the pugs of a leopard or something, and then they see that the deer have run away because the tracks of the hoof prints of the deer are wider than they are when they're walking. That's a story. The perception of the hoof prints of the deer close by in the arroyo where the water is trickling tells the story that the deer stopped there to drink. The perception, the observation of the pug marks in the sand, and then the widening of the hoof prints of the deer, those are observations, aren't they? They're just observations.
Right.
But the human mind manufactures a story out of those observations. And this is the only way that we can know where we're going, because we are intentional creatures. We are gifted with the power of intention, and we can only direct intention within the framework of a story. We cannot live without a story. It's impossible. It's impossible to live in a mythological manner. Impossible. We would be entirely lost as a species.
Okay. Well,
Joseph Campbell said that, by the way.
Yeah.
Not in those exact words, but he said that we're a storytelling species, and that's just the way we're made.
Yeah.
So I don't understand what is the objection to that. Why would you want to have, well, not objection, but what?
I don't know. I guess the glimpses that I've had of some heights that have come just on me like thunder and lightning.
Right.
Seem to have a feel of a direct perception of that of which we're composed, and the urge to communicate is very strong in you and in me and in most humans, and I can see how putting the pieces together to make a coherent, understandable transfer of one experience to another potential experience can require a story. But I guess the direct perception is developed and given. I don't even know how to use the words to describe that.
Well, could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
If you put the word interactive into your mental syntax, what happens? For instance, a number of people who have contacted me have related to me that they have seen the organic light in one variation or another before they knew what it was, before they accepted to use John Lash's label for it, okay? Let's put it that way.
Sure.
And this is absolutely true, because I also saw it spontaneously when I was in Cambodia, flowing from the forehead of a 12-year-old Cambodian girl. I had absolutely no idea what it was. You may have seen it, as you say, in some kind of beautiful, pearly, soft, pearly, translucent mist. And I can understand why it might be desirable in some way to say, let's not put a label on that. Let's not put it into a story. Let's just leave it as it reveals itself, the perception. I had that perception, and I'm not going to say what that perception was. Well, that's fine if you want to make that choice. But what I'm telling you is that it's an interactive experience. And it requires action from you. What is your part? It's not merely a passive thing.
Oh, no.
So the organic light, if it shows itself to you, wants to interact with you. And what I'm suggesting is that the most spontaneous and natural form of that interaction is to make it into the story of what it is.
Right.
Okay? And it is only one thing. And I know people object about that and bitch and complain about that. But even the alchemists said that. The alchemists called it the white stone, the philosopher's stone. They called it the sulfic hydrolith, which means the Sophianic water stone.
Right.
Because it's like water, it's like stone, it's like a mist. They said there are 500 or 600 names for the stone. But one of the most remarkable statements that the alchemists made was they said that our stone is all things. And it is just one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Sophianic story is about the one thing that it is.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Chipper. I'll pass it on to Uranus Rising.
I wanted to know about Kalki. Would you tell us about him? Why he's appeared now? Why he's part of the Sophianic intervention scenario? Also, it would be helpful if you would explain if and how her intervention differs from a savior action. I think that needs to be fleshed out for us.
Well, of course
that delineation.
It does. Yes, it does. It's a really important delineation. In fact, I was shocked myself when I came through these 3 sessions with this new material, if you wish to call it that, with this extrapolation into FGS 2.0, her intervention scenario. I'll just give it to you. I'll lay it out to you the way she laid it into me, okay?
Great.
It said, when Sophia had observed from in the laboratory dome of the Galactic Center, she had observed that the protoplasmic germ of Anthropos had spread throughout the galactic limb, spread on propagules or seeds which are carried by plasmic streams, and it had embedded itself in hospitable environments, planetary systems. It had done this 9 times, and each one of these 9 times, the experiment failed because the human organism, turned against its environment. Well, I was very, very shocked to see this, of course. And but however, there are limitations that are involved even with aeonic experiments. And she couldn't go back and recalibrate the genome, The fact is that the genome was just too rich. Mm-hmm. You could say, it's too rich. You could say it's like if you have a car and you put a mix of fuel in the car, it's like putting jet fuel in an ordinary automobile, She and Telete, in their youthful enthusiasm, because they were young prodigies among the aeons, dosed our species with super intense capacities. And it's the very intensity of these capacities and the combination of certain elements, certain faculties, the paranoiac faculty of play and pretending, combined with the cognitive latitude that was given by Thelete, that is, means the extreme slack in our instinctual programs, Other animals, we're animals, by the way. This is an important message of the Gaian story. We're animals. Other animals have instinctual programs which are also reflections of her wisdom and of the divine intelligence. But you notice that they stay very strictly within their instinctual programs, whereas we have this enormous amount of latitude. When you combine that enormous amount of latitude, it's like too much, you know. It's like Roger Waters said in that wonderful musical thing he did years ago, Amused to Death, you know, give any species enough rope and it's going to hang itself, you know.
Yeah.
So she observed all this, and so she thought, okay, she's standing there with her nose pressed to the observation booth, and she's completely absorbed all by herself in this drama of the anthropos. And she said, well, what would I do if I could create a setting for them where that would give them optimum opportunity to learn how to deal with their excessive capacities?
Ah.
Yeah. We've superdosed them. There's nothing we can do about that because the dose is released now. You see, the dose is in the Orion Nebula. The plasmic genomic matrix has been implanted out there in the galactic limb, so you can't go out and re-engineer it. It's been engineered according to these particular traits. So she said, well, first of all, I would put them in this setting. And then she dreamed of a setting that consisted of 3 bodies, a star, Earth-like planet, which would be the laboratory, and a moon, a satellite. And she said, well, I'll put them in that kind of world. There are probably many 3-body worlds out there. We know there are all kinds of planetary systems. And she said, I give them special conditions that if we know that they're very observant, we know that they have a genius level for learning. So I'm going to put in their face, through the demonstration of the processes of nature, and particularly the behavior of other animals, I'm going to show them things. And if they can learn from those other animals, they will then learn how to constrain and direct their own excessive powers. So this is how she set up the experiment. And I'm still exploring this, by the way. Right now, as we speak, I'm looking carefully at this, and I'm finding the correct syntax to describe exactly how she envisioned this experiment. And then she said, but because this is the point where you got to feel for her, if you can feel anything for a goddess, you got to feel for her. She said, oh, okay, I'm pretty sure I could put them in a setting. If I could customize the setting, it would be like, suppose you had a bunch of school children who are very bright, and you were the teacher of the school children, but they were very reckless and raucous, and they were always fighting in school and everything, and they were an unruly bunch of kids, you know. So you think, well, we're going to take them out on a field trip to nature, and like, for instance, make them walk along a narrow path that goes above a little river. And then they would have to like walk in line, and they would have to look after each other because the person in front might slip and then the person behind them could catch them. They would have to learn how to look after each other and cooperate. Put them out in nature, put them in a setting where they're tested against natural conditions, and their unruliness and their violence, they would learn to bring it down and tone it down. You see?
Discipline it?
Discipline it. To discipline it. Yes, that's right. That's the word. Thank you. So she envisioned all that in a most wonderful way. And that is the setting that we are in now. I mean, why are we on a planet with a diversity of symbiotic processes from the level of the amoeba up through sea creatures, up through reptiles, snakes, birds, animals, of such an enormous diversity of behaviors? What is it there to show us something? It's there to teach us something. He said, I'll give them 1,000,001 chances to look at the laboratory setting and learn from the setting how to tone down and discipline these supercharged faculties that we've given them. This was her genius idea. Then she said, and this is where you come back to the the tender part of it. But they might not do it. So if at the end of the experiment it seems to be going bad again, then I will intervene.
Okay.
Now, I was shocked. You see, right? That's her. You've got her. Feel that. That's her. That's the divine planetary mother. So I was shocked because the first thing that came into my mind when I was debriefing myself after this session was, holy shit, people are going to say, John Lash, what are you doing now? You're starting to peddle an intervention scenario after you spent years destroying everyone that we've had so far. You know?
Yeah.
The messianic avatars, and now you're going to give us one. What on earth are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
But I like to take chances, as you know.
Yes.
So I'm going to take a chance. And I'm going to say that she decided, yes, if even given this fantastic opportunity to learn symbiosis and cooperation from the natural setting and discipline our unruly impulses, even if with all that we failed, she would intervene because she couldn't bear to see it crash again.
That I understand very much.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there is an intervention scenario that she herself constructed in her mind as a divine aeon. And if we want to know what that is, we look at the myth of Perseus and Andromeda, and we look at the Kalki myth, the 10th avatar of Vishnu in Hindu mythology. And we kind of mix them together and put them together and twist them, turn them, and look at the refractions of them, because we have to adjust them, because that's received material and it's corrupted, and in certain ways does not accurately reflect her intervention. But by putting those things together, as I'm doing now, we can see the conditions of her intervention, and her intervention is now. Now. It is between the years 2011 and 2014.
Well, thank you for that. That needed to be clarified, very much so.
Indeed it does, because I threw people on that one.
Yeah.
I didn't throw them overboard, but I threw them a little down the deck. Threw me too, I swear. I'm still staggered. I am. I mean, I am. I'm stunned. I never thought that I would be that I would be teaching and sharing this and asking other people to not go along with me on faith, but to go into the story to see if it can be verified. Okay?
Yeah. I think my only concern would be if she intervenes, are we going to learn? And is that part of the intervention somehow teaching us?
Well, it's a very good question, and I don't know the answer because I'm standing right before it as it develops, you see.
Mm-hmm. Well, we shall see. Vamos a ver.
We shall. Everything that is happening, thank you so much. Everything that I chart in the Gaia navigation experiment, I chart in real time.
Yeah.
And so that's the amazing thing about it. And right now in real time, I'm only up to this point that I just described in putting together her intervention. I mean, it's you have to live in the moment with this. This is the power of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John, very much.
No, thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Uranus. To end this topic of changing roles and what future society do we believe Gaia is moving us towards, Uranus Rising brought up a very interesting point. Firstly, yes, we are animals and we live on Sophia as animals, but in other parts of enlightenment, they talk about us being beings of light that inhabit this animal body, and we are part of a greater consciousness. can we really continue to evolve, as Uranus specified, in this animal body? Animals like to fuck and enjoy violence. One question I've had lingering in my mind is that, can we evolve within Sophia? Is it that, is Sophia holding us back for her own evolvement, and hence the ultimate enlightenment at the end will be us evolving outside of Sophia?
I can't conceive of any evolution apart from her. Personally, that's just my limitation, maybe. I don't want anything apart from her. I don't want anything else. Now, maybe other people want to go into light bodies. I don't share that desire, so I can't really adequately respond to that question. I'm very happy to be an animal, and I want to be a beautiful, dangerous animal. That's my pleasure. An animal that is of no harm to anyone who does not intend harm, but is indeed very harmful to those who intend harm. I want to be that kind of animal, and that animal that can do that is also an animal that can dance and fuck and play and lick and have great pleasure. That's what I want to be, and that's what I understand she has designed us to be. Now, here's where you may really part ways with me, and I respect it entirely if you find that to be limiting, and if you have a philosophy or a spiritual perspective that would indicate that you're going to go from the light being bound to a body to something else. I don't go there. You want to go there? You're welcome to. But I don't go there. I stay right here. And I'm never leaving this planet. Just don't want to. I like it. It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. And I've been around.
That's very true. The other thing was, John, as part of the changing roles in future society, there's an ongoing methodology in life and business, which is always look for the simplest solution. If moving from point A to point B, you try to find a straight line. Now, some say we are approaching an eschaton and hardening of time, a complexity wave that will make life much more complex. Does Gaia want us to go back to a hunter-gatherer society, or will Gaia allow us to live in a technological age, an age of nuclear technology and in the internet? You recently talked about chaos theory. Does Gaia intend for us to go back to a simple life, or to embrace chaos and complexity and evolve as we pass March 2014 and the end of the Kalpa?
Well, these are, of course, the huge questions, the huge philosophical issues of this moment we live in, this unique moment, this terrifying moment. These are also, of course, the huge moral issues and survival issues, all wrapped into one big enchilada here. I wouldn't care to speak in a syntax right now of saying what she wants. I've been thinking for the last... I'll tell you the direction that my shamanic practice is going right now. My shamanic practice is telestic shamanism, as you know, drawn from the paradigm of the mysteries. Telestic means directed toward a purpose or aim. So if I take mushrooms or some other psychoactive medicine, sacred medicine, to go into shamanic trance, in a hyper state, and I go into the Nahual and I investigate, I do it with a specific intent and purpose. And my purpose right now, as of the last couple of days, is to answer these very questions you just put to me. And I sum it up in this way, because you have to go into, when you do telestic shamanism, when you go into, it's a very delicate process, because when you go into the telestic trance and allow yourself in total immersion, it floods your NLP. And so you can't carry a thought into it. It's very hard to carry a thought into it because it melts down and floods your NLP at the neurochemical level. So any question that I can bring to the Nahual has to be a simple question that I can retain, because I can't retain very complex questions. So the question that I was bring is, what would be the success of this experiment on her terms? I'm going to ask her that. I can go right to her and ask her. And that's the only way that I would know how to answer what you just said. I cannot make up the answer. I cannot fabricate it. I cannot give you some wise-ass, male mind construct. I can only know by going and asking. And I'd really like to know. But I will say one thing, and this is not, this is just my personal judgment, one human being talking to another. The divine Sophia loves our species in the measure of its reverence for her. That is not because she is like a patriarchal male god who says, revere me, worship me, adore me. No, it's because she knows that in our reverence for her, we find our true relation to the earth and to each other. Our reverence for her is a reality to be transacted with her. But it is not a reverence that you bring in the old-fashioned, old-time religion. Because when we transact, when we bring our reverence to her, that is to nature and supernature, we transact the terms of our own survival. Can you see that? That's why she loves our reverence. Because when she sees our reverence, she knows we're being sane and sober, and we can transact the terms of our own survival. So for the most part, it falls upon us. It's our responsibility to transact the terms of survival after the breakdown of this current civilization. And I, for one, do not believe that we can survive in high technology, because it's too archontic and it has too many unhealthy and deranging side effects. So yes, I would guess, now this is just me guessing now, not the Turton speaking, I would guess that she would wish to take us back to a simple way of life, but one in which we have all of our needs met, but according to free energy technology, according to life supportive and life enhancing technologies, and that means no big cities.
Okay.
That's my guess. You know, when I first got to talk to Sophia, just let me throw this in. When I first realized I was able to communicate with her as I am able to talk to you, she told me two things. And they were so casual, she threw them out. I was like stunned. I was just absolutely floored. Because I was like coming to her saying, oh, my goddess, you know, oh, your laws and your rules, and, you know, teach me and enlighten me, and what are the magnificence, you know, give me the magnificent understanding of your rules, and what the fuck do you want us to do, you know? And you know what she said? She said, watch your boundaries and make yourself comfortable. Those are her rules. Now, if we can have massive technological societies and massive cities operating in some science fiction futuristic manner and still watch our boundaries and make ourselves comfortable, then all fine.
Okay, thank you, John. The next topic is vision of destination, and its question is from Andromeda.
Okay. Let me give you a little bit of background that will make you understand the question that I want to put to you. There is archaeological and historical evidence of the existence of peaceful and cooperative societies where there was no violence on Earth. As an example, I will cite Caral in Peru, but there were others in different parts of the planet. Don't you think that saying that psychopathy exists only because of the trauma of birth is oversimplifying things? There is more evidence that psychopathy might be hereditary than birth trauma. Would it be possible that more than birth, psychopathic behavior appeared in the planet as a consequence of a major cataclysmic situation of famine?
Well, yeah, for years I thought so, and I consider that the anthropologists and experts in ancient history who've looked into this question have come very close to a truth here. The rise of civilization through agriculture and the traumatic effects of agriculture, for one thing, and the traumatic effects of catastrophic natural events, which then affected the civilizations that were based on agriculture. And I used to think that was the explanation of how things started to go seriously wrong. So I appreciate you bringing up this aspect of research into our past. It's an extremely important element of our self-understanding as a species. But today, I would say on balance, I would say that was perhaps a contributing factor. But I strongly hold to the view that the psychopathic outbreak, the threat of the psychopathic behavior we're facing today is 90% due to birth trauma. And I think that the great upheavals that might have happened in the past due to natural phenomena like desertification and so forth. This is the theory of James de Mayo, who was a follower of Wilhelm Reich. Many people have observed that the Abrahamic religions are desert religions. They come from people who have been traumatized by the loss of nature. Those observations are extremely helpful, but I do hold to my view that, which is purely Gnostic, of course, that birth trauma is the primary cause of the murderous and deceitful psychopathy that we are facing right now.
But how can then be explained that prior to major upheavals on the part of the planet, people were able to live peacefully? Because this town, if for example, in Peru, which is or has been called the city of love, because they had no weapons and there was no evidence whatsoever of fights in the burials. The kids that were found were considered to have been dead for natural causes, and it's a town which was of certain size, and they were basically into commerce, but no.
That's right. I know Corral is an absolutely amazing phenomenon, absolutely amazing, and there were places like that around the world. What are you asking? How could these peaceful societies have existed? Well, maybe they had good birth practices. I'm not saying. I do insist, and I'll lose a lot of people on this one, but that's fine with me, that we are not intended to be born through the pelvis of a woman. I do insist on that. Nevertheless, we're an extremely adaptable species, and some tribes and cultures in the past may have recognized this, and they may have come up with methods of painless childbirth. In fact, I know there are women today who would attest to the fact that childbirth was not painful and that the child was delivered with minimum or no danger to, of damage to its brain. So maybe in their wisdom, these peaceful people recognized that, and if they had a strong matriarchal base and they had midwives, a tradition of midwives who could deliver children in such a way that they weren't traumatized. That seems.
I understand that. So you basically say that, it's possible that the modern practices that we have in the West of childbirth might be most the reasons that the fact itself of giving birth. If you have proper practices, because they do have proper practices in Peru, even in the Amazon, they have
Sure.
a different way of giving birth, which is
Sure.
quite different.
Sure, and water births, and I've had women write into me who have told me about painless and non-traumatic birth experiences with their children. I don't deny that that's possible. I'm just saying that it is certainly not the norm.
No, it isn't in the West. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andromeda. And the next question is from Uranus Rising.
John, going into this, in some of your latest interviews and audio recordings, you have introduced the subject you have entitled Against Procreation.
Right.
In these, you've spoken about how the current birth process is traumatic and damaging to the brainstem.
Right.
And it is not how Sophia intended us to be born. Could
Right.
you speak here about this perspective?
Well, yeah, that's another part of the Sophianic vision story that's unfolding in 2.0. For instance, it's really important to understand if she didn't intend us to reproduce as we do, that is to say, with the newborn delivered through the pelvis of a woman, through the pelvic cavity, what did she intend, And, how does she feel when she wakes up on Earth and finds out that we don't do it that way? How is she going to deal with that? Because the fact is, this is current. This is current. Now,
Yes.
As I'm plotting the Gaia navigation experiment and tracking her recall process, I expect, I don't predict, but I expect that much will come to light regarding this in the next few months. As the apogee of the moon approaches the eye of the bull, she recalls these aspects of the experiment as she originally intended them. So the apogee of the moon is now around 17 degrees of Taurus in the constellation of the Ram. It's kind of stalled for about 2.5 months in the Ram, and then it moves up to the Pleiades, which is going to be a tremendous moment when the apogee reaches the Pleiades, and then that will be in let's see, that will be around September when the apogee of the moon reaches the Pleiades, and then around December 2012, the apogee of the moon will be conjunct the star Aldebaran in the eye of the bull. Now, this is a tremendous, tremendous moment in the awakening of the goddess to our situation, and in her understanding of what has happened to the divine experiment, and how it can be turned, how it can be shifted away from a catastrophic ending. You see? So
Yeah.
that's coming up. That's coming up. And I can't speak of it except as it comes up in real time.
Okay. You'd mentioned, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, meiosis.
Yes, meiosis. M-E-O.
Meiosis.
Yeah, meiosis, yeah.
What
As a
is
form
it?
of reproduction.
Yeah. What is
It's
it?
cell division. It's like what you see when you see an amoeba, a little amoeba under a mic, and then it splits into two amoebas. The daughter cells and those split into two. That's how she intended for us to reproduce. As a matter of fact, what we would do is that we would, each person would have a double, and that when the physical form of a human being reached a certain stage, it would exude this double. And the mysteries of the double are very, very deep. This is something that I haven't talked about much yet. I suspect that I would come to the front in the course of this year. We all have a double, an exact replica, physical, of our own physical bodies, our ordinary physical bodies. And some people have actually even met their doubles. I don't know if any of you have.
No, I haven't.
Have you ever met your double in a dream?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It can happen in a dream. It can also happen in physical reality, which is something of a shock. But there are accounts of that, by the way. In fact, a really remarkable thing happened at the close of the last century, the end of the 19th century, and throughout the 19th century, actually, from the time of the Romantics, the early part of the 19th century to the end of the 19th century, there was kind of an outbreak of double mania in the world. And it's remarkable. For instance, just give you one example. The poet Shelley, the English poet
Yes.
Shelley, who drowned in Italy swimming. Well, he saw his double a few days before he died. And it's known in the lore of the double, by the way, and it's an interesting area to read about, that perceiving your own double can be very dangerous and can be taken as a sign that you are going to die. Goethe saw his double twice, physically. He wasn't even dreaming. Other poets and writers and artists of the Romantic period and of the period of the occult revival at the end of the 19th century, like de Maupassant and others, have spoken about their double. The story of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, or the story of Dorian Gray. These are stories about the double. I wrote a whole book about the double, twins and the double, on this matter. So we were actually intended, in her initial vision of this experiment, Anthropos 10, to be able to reproduce ourselves through our double. And the way we would do that, I don't think I can give you a convincing description of it right now. But I can give you a clue.
Okay.
You're aware, I think, you would accept, I think, that we are all surrounded by an aura.
Yes.
Castaneda called it the luminous egg.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we're all inside of an egg-shaped aura.
Yes.
Right?
I'm with you.
Okay, good. This is a useful piece of intel from shamanism and Castaneda, who also wrote a lot about the double, by the way. Gennaro often manifested his double to people, Anyway, what you have to imagine, it's like a soap bubble. And because it is a bubble, it can carry a reflection.
Yes.
And so what would happen, the way that we would reproduce, is that at a certain point, when we had exhausted the expressions that we could make in one physical body, rather than declining and dying away and aging, we would begin to see our future body forming in the bubble mirror of your aura. It's like, imagine that you're in a bubble and you're looking in front of you, and it's like reflected on the glass of that bubble, on the surface of that bubble, is another image of yourself. That is your future self. And by the power of imagination, you would be able to nurture this image and to have an interactive relation with this image to such a degree that you would nurture that spiritual fetus of your future self. And then at a certain moment, the physical self that was actually transferring its life to that new entity would just wilt and die away, and the new self would step out of the bubble into the center of the bubble, and it would begin to live its next life.
So in other words, the energy would become denser and take on material form.
That's right. That's right. The energy would begin first only as an image, like a plasmic, a kind of a plasmic phantom that would be hovering on the surface of the bubble. And then it would gradually, there would be an exchange of life force. It would be very conscious dying. Now, there are clues and hints of this process here and there throughout the world. For instance, the Tibetan practice of leaving the body through the top of the head.
Yes.
Conscious death.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would have involved that, except that you wouldn't have just left the body to go into a formless void. You would have left it to go into the metamorphosis of another version of yourself.
Okay.
Yeah. So
interesting.
It is. It's an extremely interesting subject and something to be explored a lot more in the near future, I think. I can only give you that very tentative description of it right now. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful.
Well, funny enough, what's going on in my brain is maybe we can put to good use some of this Fukushima radiation and mutate ourselves to do it. You never know.
Well, mutation is the key word. In fact, she is doing things. She is using the force of her first attention to produce massive mutations in the human species, as far as I can tell. I'm tracking this in the Gaian navigation experiment, moment by moment. We're in one right now, what's called a perigee strike. This perigee strike occurs in the constellation of the Virgin, at the knees of the Virgin, and it's the third of a sequence that we've had in the Virgin. What is the purpose of these strikes? You see, I'm trying to explain to people that how an aeon or a god operates. They have spontaneously manifesting intention. We have serial manifesting intention. So if I intend to do something, like I intend to build a model plane, I can form that intention. I can construct the steps of that will be necessary to construct this model plane or this model boat, and then I go and proceed to do it. But with an aeon, the construction is simultaneous with the intention. There's
Sounds
no
like
middle steps.
Sounds like free association in a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
It also sounds like what happens in lucid dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
Because in lucid dreaming, we approach the state of intentionality, which is called enoia in the Gnostic language, E-N-N-O-I-A, and pronoia, P-R-O-N-O-I-A. These are two aspects of the projective intentionality of an aeon. We approach them in lucid dreaming because when you're in a lucid dream, and Castaneda described this in many instances, all you have to do is intend something and it happens.
Right.
You intend to be somewhere and you're there instantly. Well, that is the way that an aeon operates all the time and on a massive scope. So the Aeon Sophia, who is embodied in the earth, is liberating a part of her intention from upholding the natural processes of the planet. That's been a big handicap to her up until now. She's been like a overtaxed, multitasking mother. She's had to uphold all of the processes of the planet. Hasn't been able to tear part of her attention away to the specific matter of correction. But now she is. And so periodically she hits us with the purpose of a mutation. And I am convinced that, yes, that in this radioactive environment, we actually have an opportunity for some directed mutations of an extraordinary kind that will absolutely defy science. Don't even listen to science. Don't even pay any attention to what they are telling us, because they don't really know. If they're ignorant enough to create nuclear energy without knowing how to, shut it down, with risking half-lives of 40 and 50 million years, then they're so ignorant that they don't even really know what it is in the first place, you know?
Yeah.
And other people have made this comment, you know, that it seems like there would be extraordinary mutations of our organism and of our mind, psyche and body, in this radiation saturated environment. So we'll see.
Yeah. Just to take a step back and maybe explore this birthing as it is now.
Right.
Does it have to be traumatic? You know,
No.
of course.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
No, it doesn't.
Of course, the infant has to pass through this process of the birth canal. But
right.
they will experience stress, but that isn't necessarily traumatic. And stress is part of life. One that pushes us forward so we don't stay in a place we have outgrown. Even in Stan Grof's work, as well as others, they explore birth trauma and how to integrate it and use it, and how to become comfortable with stress so that we know if we persevere, we can push through something. And I've even seen people who have been born by cesarean section that don't have a clue about how to do that. So on a psychological basis, if we lose this process of birth as it is now, then what do we do?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously, we're deep into the process of mitotic reproduction. Our species has adapted to what Gnostics would consider to be an anomaly. One of the really exciting things that's happening in the Gaian, in the process of correction, which we're tracking in the Gaian navigation experiment, is that the phylogenetic memory circuits of our species are being activated by her. Now, normally, we don't have access to phylogenetic memory. The ordinary person cannot remember what happened to the species in remote periods of time. We know that shamans do have that access to that memory. And that part of the role of the shaman in a tribe, if I'm correct, tell me what you think, part of the traditional roles of shamans in tribes is that they could go back and access the tribal memory back into very remote periods.
Well, I thought that was one of the major functions of the shaman within the tribe.
Indeed it was. Indeed it was. And we see that, for instance, among the Australian Aborigines, where they preserve in songs these long, long narratives of things that happened in the remote history, in the Navajo creation myth, and so forth and so on. Well, due to how she is pulling us into correction with her and pulling us into what she considers to be the survivable and benign aspects of this experiment, the part of the experiment she wants to preserve. Due to the way she's doing that, it involves activating the phylogenetic memory circuits species-wide. Now, what that's going to mean, I really can't exactly say. I am really intently looking at this right now, and I'm in dialogue with a number of people about this. It appears that means that those of us who are inside the story and who have the narrative structure of the story to guide our remembering and imagining will be able to access fantastic recesses of our past, and will find them to be extremely helpful to orient us to the future. How it will be with people who are not in the story, I don't know, but I expect that even people who have no knowledge whatsoever of the things we're discussing here this evening could have flashes, could have memories, intuitive breakthroughs, the kind of things that Stan Grof talks about, you know, that people have, they find themselves in a spiritual emergency, as he calls it, and then suddenly, wow, you know, the stress of that emergency unlocks in a chain reaction a whole series of neurological and neurochemical circuits which go deeply into our species intelligence. So I think that there's some really exciting things happening with this. And part of for me, the really exciting part of this that I'm looking at very closely is remembering how we fell into reproduction. Remembering how it happened. Yep.
Great.
Yeah, really. That's exciting.
Okay, one last question about this. A woman's body goes through a huge change during pregnancy, such as widening of the pelvic bones, and the vaginal canal tissues become elastic in order to accommodate the child's head as it passes through the canal.
Right.
In fact, as it is now, it is designed for birth, not just sex. So I am trying to understand why you feel that this design is flawed as it is.
No, it's not. Okay.
If it's not a traumatic birth, for instance.
Right.
And not just for humans, but what about all mammals? And I won't even go into mentioning birds and fish and anything else that lays eggs. But I'm coming from a place of remembering my own birth, which was stressful, yes, but not traumatic by any means. In fact, I was relieved to be born, and that experience has served me very well as a useful template for change and transitions. You, on the other hand, have stated publicly that you had a very traumatic forceps birth. So perhaps our own experiences of our birth may color our reality tunnel, the way we perceive things. You know, what would be your comment to this? What's your perspective on this?
Well, my perspective is that the fact that I was pulled out by forceps does not account for my view that the form of reproduction we experience is anomalous. That is a teaching from the ancient wisdom schools. It's not my idea. So, you know.
But it ties in with, it seems, determination to place traumatic birth on the forefront. And, you know, I'm just wondering about the connection with psychopathy and all that you've been saying. I want to make sure that where this is coming from in you, and that it's genuine to what you say it is, because people are questioning this. And I think the clarity that you can provide us now as we discuss this can help us move forward.
Okay. Well, let me be as clear as I can be at the moment. First of all, we're not concerned with reproduction through a human channel in other animals. It's fine in animals. That's not an issue. It's not an issue. The issue is not in our design. We have adapted to it, but it's an adaptation to an anomaly of design.
Okay.
So, as far as a woman's body being the vessel of gestation and birth, well, we see how that works. But there are many things about about a woman's sexual anatomy that have absolutely nothing to do with that process.
Oh, absolutely.
And how do you explain that? In terms of nature. Yeah, how would one explain that in terms of nature if we say, well, according to nature, now we're not talking about the intelligence of the divine Sophia and her dreaming of this experiment. We're just using the sort of loose paradigm. Well, nature is adaptation. It's evolution is a process of adaptation, and so nature provides developments that fit the needs of animals. So how come a woman has all of this sexual gear on board that has absolutely nothing to do with childbirth?
Well, I would say both. That the human species, or I should say females, are the only ones who operate in a different way. Once a month, you can become pregnant. You can have orgasms. It sets us apart from animals in a way. We're ready for sex anytime. Unlike animals.
Animals who do it psychically. That's right. That's right. So my point would be that many features of the female body suggest, if I might use that word, that it was designed for pleasure.
Oh, I would agree with that.
Rather than for the reproduction of the species. So if you can imagine a woman whose body couldn't reproduce because she didn't have the internal ovarian horns and the womb uterine cavity, she didn't have it in its current form, but she had the accessories for pleasure, then that would be the body form of women on this planet before we fell into generation.
Okay. Does that mean that the male species is also a design flaw in that he has testes that produce sperm?
No, but that's also in a way a kind of anomaly of the original design that she pictured. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's right.
Oh, okay. I have a better idea in my mind.
Yeah, both men and women anatomically have been mutated toward this form of reproduction. Whereas if that mutation hadn't happened, we would have pretty much the similar forms that we have now, where there would be the anatomy of the woman would be different from the anatomy of the man, but it would be simplified, and it would not contain some of the anatomical formations that we now have.
Wonderful explanation. Thank you so much, John.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I got that across because it's not easy. And as I said, I'm right in the throes of looking at all this right now. So,
well, we have to explore all this and, hear your thoughts, all your thoughts on it. And there's lots of twists and turns as we go down this avenue. So appreciate it.
They sure are. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Uranus. You are listening to John Lash. Please support his work by visiting his websites gaiaspora.org and metahistory.org. Okay, the next area of discussion is status report, and the next question is from Chipperdog.
John, I guess I've gotten a bit confused here by the usage of a framework of a coherent story and the usage of eon as describing an entity. In 1933, Alfred Korzybski wrote a book called Science and Sanity, An Introduction to Non-Aristotelian Systems and General Semantics, wherein he describes in mathematical and scientific language as he understood it circa 1933, a process whereby the human organism abstracts a minute portion of the energetic stimulus so richly afforded by a universe and then makes or forms thought pictures and images in the brain that are then brought in trickles of awareness to the eye of that individual person, where labels are applied and then used to describe that awareness. In this regard, does that which gets labeled the powers that be differ from what you have labeled Sophia? How does it differ, if so, and is one label any more real or have more validity than another?
Well, in terms of general semantics, no. So if you want to be a follower of Korzybski, I think that's his name. I remember I read that years ago when I was 20.
Yeah.
In terms of general semantics, no, they're just labels. You want to live your life based on general semantics, then words are just labels and all labels are relative. And that's the end of the story. And see where that takes you.
No, he said his phrase, the map is not the territory. So the words used to describe is not the reality as lived.
Yeah, well, he is wrong about that. Because the words that are used to describe, let me give you an example. You come to my house and you sit here, up here in this little place where I write, and over there on the daybed is a black cat. Okay?
All right.
Now, I'm saying it's a black cat. Maybe we could say it's a stoop mule.
Yeah.
Maybe stoop mule is black cat in some other syntax, in some other semantics. Or you could say that it's totally relative. We would say, what is that on the bed? Is it a black cat or a stoop mule? Okay? And as far as that's concerned, general semantics is true. But that's not the way things are. Because when I say Nikita, the cat looks at me. And when
As
I say
a learned
to you,
response.
and hear me out,
All right.
and when I say to you, it's not a learned response. And when I say to you, Nikita, and I point to the cat, the term Nikita is not just a label put on the cat. You see? So that's outside of the general semantic scheme.
No,
which is a very...
I don't see how you naming a cat Nikita, because it didn't come out of its mother with that label. I don't think.
It's not a label. Because if it was a label, the cat wouldn't respond. The cat responds to its name. That means that there is more than semantics and labeling at work here. There is interactivity. And that transcends semantics. Semantics is a suffocating straitjacket of conceptual terminology that refers to more conceptual terminology that refers back to the original conceptual terminology and leaves you nowhere in terms of the way language really works. Korzybski did not understand the dynamic, magical, evocative power of language. He was just into the dry fossilization of language in terms of semantics.
I don't know the man. I couldn't tell what his imaginative life consisted of.
Well, I'm talking about his work. Korzybski's work leaves you there. That's where it leaves you. It leaves you in the fossilized place of labels. Well, is Sophia a label the same equivalent as, what is it? The powers that be,
right.
TP? Sure, if you want to put it in that framework, if you want to stay in a semantic straitjacket, that's all it is. But if you want to step out on the terrace of my house and I point to the earth and I say, that's Sophia. I'm pointing to an animal, just like I point to the cat and I say, Nikita. I point to the planet and I say, that animal is named Sophia. And you can actually get a response from that animal by calling its name. Just like I can get a response from Nikki by calling her name. That's not semantics. That's way beyond semantics.
Okay. How does Sophia Waking translate into societal restructurings in regards to the long-standing denigration of and overpowering of the feminine, balanced with its yabyum, the yin-yang portion of the masculine, that seems to have been driven to near extinction in both women and men?
Yeah, well said. Really. That sums it up very nicely. And the first part of the question again is, how does the correction, how does her awakening what?
translate into societal restructurings. I mean, if we live in this story and we come to understand the story and the coherence involved in it, how will that translate into societal restructurings?
Gotcha. Well, I think it translates one couple at a time. I think it translates the healing of the wounds of patriarchy. Patriarchy has wounded men as much as it has women. It's wrecked all of us terribly. And matriarchy in its unbalanced aspects has also done harm. How do we heal that? And the fabric of a new society has to be built stitch by stitch. And each stitch is a couple of people. Just like when you're stitching a cloth, you put the needle in, puncture through the cloth, you bring it under it, and bring it out again. And between those two puncture holes, there's a stitch. So the new fabric of society is made one stitch at a time. And each of those puncture holes is a man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. The people who will be able to exemplify the new society are men and women who have faced off together and healed the gender split between themselves. It's an intimate healing process that leads then to the new fabric of society, I think, I would guess.
So 2 by 2 all the way down the road.
All the way down the road. That's why Tantra is a buddy system. That's why I recommend people to do the Gaian Tantric vow together. And I do things like that as much as I can.
Right.
I pair off whenever I can because I find that it's more synergetic and the results are better. And I have a witness, and I like having a witness.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, John, just a quick question. I know you've talked a little bit in your recent navigation briefing about the ultimate threat, but interestingly, in your recent meditations on Sophia's correction, can you speculate on what the demiurge and the rest of the archons are planning to do to counteract Sophia? I haven't really heard much on that topic, or do they really matter?
You know, it's a question that comes up all the time. You know, does it matter what the archons are doing and how much of a danger are they and so forth and so on. It's a question that just won't go away. And of course, the archon factor is an important plot factor in the Sophianic vision story. But it is, I want to say that I do consider it to be just a subplot. And I also want to say, and I'm glad for the opportunity to say this, that without sounding like I'm blowing my horn, it seems to be John Lash that put the term archon into social discourse, and specifically with the Gnostic view, the Gnostic spin, that the archons are this type of mind parasite and so forth. So now people cite that, and they talk about the archons using allusions to Gnostic works. Oh, they cite the Gnostic works. And they often make allusions to me, but they don't cite me. I really don't mind. I'm not out here trying to get credit for things. But there is one thing that I want to register an objection to. People like Barbara Han Clow and Jay Widener and others use some of the archon material that evidently comes from my work in metahistory. The problem is, I don't have any objection to that, and they don't need to cite me. But the problem is they're not using the rest of the story. And that's a really big problem for them. So if you're going to talk about the archons in the Gnostic sense and the demiurge, Yaldabaoth, put it in the whole story. Talk about Sophia. Tell the whole story. It's not fair It's not fair to the Gnostics. It's not fair to the Teleste of the mystery school to lift that out of their story and leave the rest disregarded. So I just want to point that out. And I'm happy to have a chance to register that, my view on that. I have often said, you raise an extremely crucial question here. What is what is the point of the spear here? What is the real focus of the danger we're facing? I've often said that the fire herself in correction is taking care of the archons. She'll take them down in her way and take down the structures that they have insinuated into our world. If you remain in her story and observe her story, your own imagination will be guided by her story and protected, and therefore your imagination will develop a higher and higher immunity to archontic fantasy, which is narcissistic fantasies and all these incredible speculative scenarios that people are weaving about our ancient past and other civilizations. And all of this is dross, and it just drops away if you use your imagination in the guiding frame of our story. So that more or less takes care of the archons. The ultimate threat to this experiment is not the archons. They're a menace, and they produce a lot of grief because of their smoke and mirrors effect. They produce a lot of confusion. But the ultimate threat is interspecies predators. The ultimate threat is predators of our own kind, the psychopaths. And what makes them the ultimate threat is that they have a phobia of life. They have a sick phobia. They're afraid of life. They're afraid of all that thrives in freedom and beauty on this planet. They are afraid of the natural freedom and beauty of thriving life. It terrifies them. And combine that phobia with their control freak tendencies, and you have the ultimate threat. That's why they want to wipe out life, the natural world. And of course, they're complete dupes to the archons because they believe in transhumanism and other archontic cons. They believe that if they wipe out the natural world because they have a phobia of all that lives, this is the basis of eugenics. Can you understand that? The basis of this eugenics madness is a phobia of what lives. Wilhelm Reich understood this, and that's why he said, only knowledge of that which is alive can dispel terror. So these psychopaths are complete dupes. They think that when they wipe out what they can't stand, the beauty and spontaneity of life, that the archons are going to provide them with a better world. They're complete dupes. But let's not worry about the duping of the archons. There's not that much we can do about it. But we certainly need to focus on what to do about these murderous and deceitful psychopaths. Because they are not going to stop. They're not going to go away. If you think that, I've heard these rumors lately. There'll be mass arrests and we're all going to put them in jail and bring them to justice. Well, that's a really bad joke. I don't know who's spreading that joke, but that's a really bad joke because psychopaths don't go down that way. The most that you can say about them is that, and this is something that we really need to take on board, folks. The most that you can say about them is that they do resemble serial killers to the extent that it is known that certain serial killers want to be caught. That movie Seven about the serial killer, right? A very famous serial killer movie with Kevin Spacey played the serial killer who sets up his victims in these grotesque scenes of the 7 deadly sins. And so there's a riddle involved in there, and they're making you follow their trail of breadcrumbs, which is, of course, what the psychopaths love to do, and what David Icke, love to even hype their ability to do that, which is also a very unfortunate thing. You do not want to play games with psychopaths and get involved in their codes and their serials and their formulas and their symbolism. Forget it. You just want to identify them by their behavior and take them out. And there is a tendency in some of them to want to be killed, as was illustrated very well in this film 7, where Kevin Spacey leads the detective to the point where he kills him because the serial killer decapitated his wife. Okay? It's gruesome, but that's just about the level that we're getting to here. Is that helpful? Yeah, Brad Pitt played the detective. Yes. Yeah.
Correct. So with the Archons being taken care of by Sophia, how does she do that, do you think? Is it through a frequency change of the Earth, or how do you, what's the mechanism for that? Or does the Archons need to be part of Sophia for, like, there is a good and evil, two aspects of life?
No. There are benevolent Archons, but they are in the sun. They are called the Paralymptors. There was actually a split. There's a better word for that. When a political movement splits into two parts, or when people withdraw from a movement. I can't think of the word right now.
Schism?
A schism. Yeah. There was a schism among the Archons, actually, according to the Gnostic myth, which you can read in the Hypostasis of the Archons and other cosmological texts, in which a number of the Archons decided to put in their fate with Sophia, as it were, and they took as their habitat the sun, and they live in the sun, and the sun is called in Gnostic teachings the treasury of the light, and the rule of the Paralymptors is that they are bardo spirits. They help people in the transition through death, and they receive the dying. They are in some respect connected with the white light tunnel phenomenon. They are benevolent beings, these Paralymptors, as they're called. The scholars translate that word as the receivers, because one of their identified roles is to receive the dead and the dying. They also receive dying cultures and dying civilizations. And so, as far as that split off of the Archons is concerned, they do serve Sophia, as it were. And you can read about that in some non-Nag Hammadi treatises called the Two Books of Jew, Jeu, which were discovered apart from Nag Hammadi. It's a very rare material. But as far as how she's taking down the Archons, the complicated process, I started to investigate it last year, well, a few years ago, actually. Obviously, she's doing it by the turbulence of the electromagnetic field. She's also working very closely with the sun. These coronal emissions from the sun that come to the Earth are not just blasting us apart. They're not just tearing us apart. It's not as if a tornado swept into your living room and destroyed everything. Sophia handles those. She's able to handle those. So the Earth is using these supercharged coronal emissions from the sun in order to reconfigure the electromagnetic field and also to change the levels of frequencies in the ionosphere and so forth. In doing that in ways that are absolutely fascinating and immensely powerful. And she's also destroying the structure of the Archons, their ability to get a foothold in our world by the way that she is working in the anaerobic systems. And that's a really complicated subject. I don't feel confident to say anything specific about it right now, but I was shown early on that one of the major things she's doing is she's changing the anaerobic systems of the Earth in order to make it, in order to discharge the layers of static frequencies that the Archons have deposited in the planet. And so we need to respond to these new awakening frequencies and shed the static frequencies that have been accumulated, which are the habitual archontic behaviors And I think we're going to see that evidence of that en masse in this year, and we're already seeing it. One of the things that give me an opportunity to tell you a hunch of mine, okay? What would we take as, you know how like they say the canary in the coal mine, when the canary dies, the coal miners knew that there was gas and they got the hell out of there, right?
Yes.
So what are the canaries in the coal mine regarding Gaia taking down the archons, removing the archon problem for us? Well, one of them I think would have to do with human response to advertising. You know, advertising is a massive event on this planet, and massive amounts of people apparently respond to advertising. That's hard for some of us to believe, because if any of you are like I am, and I suspect you are, I can't think of anything I've ever bought in my life as a result of an advertisement. But apparently, people respond to advertising. And I am wondering if one of the signs of her of her pulling out from under us these archonic systems is that suddenly advertising would become completely ineffective. People would just turn off to it. It wouldn't manipulate them in the way that it does now. Well, for one thing, I can see that coming by necessity, because people don't have the money to buy what advertisements are inducing them to buy, because of the bankster mafia breaking down the whole world economic system, right? So I'm just wondering if that might be a canary phenomenon.
Could the biggest canary be revolution? People not playing into the current structures and just going their own way, and maybe even revolting against the structures.
That certainly is. And again, we are seeing the whole human species being brought to the knife edge. On one edge of the blade is dissent, peaceful dissent, you know. Just don't pay your income tax. Just don't go along with the rules. We know that if there's massive dissent, there's no way that they have enough muscle and enforcement to do anything about it. But the other side of the blade is not passive dissent. The other side of the blade is the cutting, you know, is violence, bloodshed. And I was really amazed. You know who John Perkins is? Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
Yes.
Yeah. I saw a clip with him yesterday. And this is the first time I've heard anybody say this, and to hear it come from John Perkins, who I think is a loving and peaceful person from what he looks like to me. He said, there's going to be a bloodbath, and it's about time. So I think that violence is inevitable. I am not a person who advocates violence. I would love it if we could, if the big canary effect was massive dissent, and it just worked at that. I would be tickled pink. But the reason why I talk about violence, and I take the chance of being misunderstood and of being losing people, is because I know that violence is inevitable to some degree. And I would like to see if it can be elucidated and aimed violence rather than the mindless violence that has been in the past, because the perpetrators rely on the mindless violence. They rely on us turning on each other. And what they're not expecting is that violence would be aimed directly at them. And this is what we need.
Yeah, it's not just the rich versus the poor, but the true culprits.
That's right. This 1%, 99% rich versus the poor. We've got to get past these silly paradigms, you know. And capitalism, there's nothing wrong with capitalism, you know. Free enterprise capitalism is a wonderful tool of building social development. It's criminal capitalism. It's investment banking, not commercial banking. Commercial banking is fine. Investment banking is a horrible casino. Which wrecks the real economy. So we've got to get these things straightened out. But most of all, we've got to know who the enemy is and be able to recognize the psychopaths And if it comes to violence, to direct the violence toward them and not toward people who don't, not toward the wrong people.
And just let me clarify that we're not advocating violence at all. It's, I guess, we're definitely not advocating violence. Thank you for that, John. I'll pass it over to Uranus Rising.
John, getting to the point where you've been waiting for, would
really?
like to bring our listening audience up to date with Sophia's correction, perhaps with a brief description of the apogee surge of March 26th, then lead into a sequence tracking through April with the plunge, and then beyond into the post-plunge?
Wow. What a treat. Sure, I'll see what I can do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for asking. Just for those who don't know or who already do know and would like to hear it said again, the Gaia navigation experiment is an application of the mythogenetic method proposed by Joseph Campbell, theoretically, but never put into practice. By putting the mythogenetic method into practice, I invite you to bring your imagination to a disciplined exercise. As the navigator of the experiment, I signal you to the course we're taking. The navigator charts the course. I do that in specific terms by indicating when the lunar apogee, that is the point on the moon's orbit when it's closest, most distant from the Earth, is focused at a certain moment in a constellation. When the moon passes its apogee located in a certain constellation. Then the other part of the sky, the lunar perigee, likewise, 2 moments, 1 moment each month when the lunar perigee stands in a constellation at the moment that the moon moves through it. And these are very precise moments. So this is empirical astronomical data. But what I propose in the experiment is at those moments, you imagine that the Divine Sophia is doing one thing or another. Lunar apogee indicates the actions of her divine memory and her recall process. The lunar perigee, the actions of a divine alchemy, and how she is impacting our species and mutating us toward Anthropos 11, which is the survivable diaspora of this experiment. So that's the general picture, as you know. That's the frame. That's the method. Right. So what do we have coming up? We have a couple of momentous moments coming up here in April. One, when the apogee of the moon and Jupiter are together. That's the 13th, Friday the 13th, next week. And then the 27th, when the apogee, there's another apogee surge, and Jupiter is about 3 degrees from the apogee at that point. Then we go into May, June, and July. I'm just going to give you a sense of the trajectory of where we're going in terms of her recall. Her correction depends upon her remembering her own story. It's not so different than a therapy that any of us would go through, right? If we realize that there's something about our behavior that's not as we wish it, that it's mechanical or compulsive or in some way self-contradictory or self-destructive, we often go back and recapitulate our story to see the point where we lost our direction, to see the traumatic event or the decisive event that brought us to where we are now, and we correct ourselves based on that. It's exactly what she's doing, what any living animal would do, having this kind of intelligence. And so 3 things she's going to be... Yeah, go ahead.
Does she make sense of it as she recalls it? Because I'm using the metaphor of therapy. Part of that is making sense of it, too. Is that also what she's doing as she recapitulates?
Yeah, she's making sense of it. She's reevaluating it, and she's actually making it over at the very moment that she's recalling it. So she is indeed making sense of it.
Okay, thank you.
You could say in a way that she can do what we cannot do, she can actually transform the past. You can go back and recall your past. Some people claim we can transform the past. But she really is drawing upon her transformative powers as she makes this recall. So yes, she is making sense of it. What she's going to make sense of is what happened in her plunge. Because as I've explained in some of the crew notes, in order to customize an experiment, to customize a laboratory setting in a planet, she would have had to use a certain technique known to the eons, the elder scientists. And she didn't use that technique. That technique requires that the narrative intention to customize an environment must be fed around a spindle. And this spindle is the Pleiades. So she ought to have taken her intention that she was dreaming at the center of the pleroma and directed her intention to the Pleiades and allowed it to wrap around the Pleiades. And then the streaming of that intention into the galactic arms would have produced the customized setting that she wished. She didn't know how to use this device. And so she didn't realize that you need the spindle, otherwise you'll be pulled into the experiment, you see. It's too much, you see. It's not like the projection of a plasmic genome into the galactic limbs. That's more or less done by like sending it down a narrow channel. That's done by all the aeons as a whole. All the aeons together use their force, and they blow like the wonderful Mayan image of the god who has the blowgun. They blow it down, and it deposits. The germ of a species deposits in the galactic limbs and then spreads. This is not like that, because what she wanted to do was actually shape the material conditions in which that genome would grow. And therefore, the involvement with material conditions has a pull to it. And unless she ran her intention around the spiral it would pull her in, and that's what happened. What she's doing now is remembering that mistake. She's remembering that mistake. And something else is happening too, and I can give you this. This is a scoop.
Okay.
So I haven't even said this yet to the Gaian navigation crew. She began to establish two-way communication with the pleroma on March 19th, 2011. Now they're signaling back and forth. They're communicating back and forth. That's the beginning of correction. By April of this year, April, May, and June, correction has advanced to the point where the pleromic aeons can extend their pronoia, which is this process of intentional streaming. They can instead extend it to the Pleiades to create a link-up.
Wow.
That will restore to her what she herself was not originally able to do.
That's definitely a correction then.
That is a big correction. And so there are two stages to that. One stage is that the pleromic eons, including the Christos, including Thelete, all those who are involved in her story, send out like a braid of their intention. This is all done through plasmic streamings, by the way. They operate through plasmic streamings, which are the manifest material filaments of their intention. You see, everything in the universe is material. This is a teaching of Kala Tantra. So the intentions of the aeons is material. It's actually plasmical torrents carry their intention. So they're sending out a massive multi-braided plasmical torrent to the Pleiades to go into the spindling process. And then when the end of that comes out, the second part is when she links to the end of that, that is total linkage back to the pleromic center.
You once said that Kundry saw these, what I call plasma worms. I've seen them. Are these in any way connected to that?
They may well be. She sees them often.
Yeah.
And she says that they are massive, like fluid columns in the atmosphere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This may be
Interesting.
an effect of the interweaving linkage. It's like a
Very
big braid, and then the strands of that braid will feed around the Pleiades, and they will feed right into the atmosphere of the Earth. So these columns that Kundri's seeing and that you're seeing may well be the filaments of the Earth itself reaching to that connection.
That would make sense. Yes.
You know, in Avatar, when they got on their animals, and the cat people took the
braid.
pigtails, yeah,
Yeah.
and they hooked the braid into the braid of the animal.
Mm.
This is what's happening.
Yes.
It's a massive link-up braid, and the date and that is happening this month. That the braid sent from the Pleuromic Center is reaching the Pleiades this month, and then when the lunar apogee itself gets to the Pleiades in September, that's when the braiding will be totally integrated. So if this is true now, if this is not just a fantasy, and if this is not just another, wild use of human imagination, then we should be able to test by the fall of this year the premise of this story, which is that we would no longer be living in the same world that we've been living in until now. But we would be living in a world in which she could control the environment and our interaction with it in the way that she originally intended.
I'm also thinking this makes sense of what so many people have been saying, including myself, that feel that there's these incoming energies from space. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and just think what that would imply. I mean, think about that for a minute. I had a long conversation with a visitor here about this last month as we were gazing up at the Venus-Jupiter conjunction. I said, just imagine if we haven't been able to learn properly what she intended us to learn from this setting because she didn't set it up in the way she thought. She wasn't able to use the spindle mechanism. But if that mechanism is restored for her, just imagine how that's going to change everything in the way that we relate to the living environment. Yeah. I think another sign of this happening is the animals that are coming to people now. Did you see that wonderful little clip about the woman who has an eagle and a fox on her back porch?
No, I missed that, actually.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little YouTube clip. She opens up her back porch. It's somewhere where it's quite snowy. There's 3 or 4 inches of snow on the ground. And there's an eagle sitting right there on the railing. And there's a little fox who's like looking up at her and saying, hey, hey, kid, what's going on? No fear, nothing. And her 2 cats come up and they're sitting there and they're all like, hey, what's going on? And I've heard other stories as well of animals coming to us. The animals are coming to us and they're saying, hey, bro, hey, sis, this is it. This is the way it was supposed to be. Now do you see why you were put in this world with us? Now do you see why you're the exceptional animal in this fantastic menagerie? Now do you see? Now do you see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite amazing.
It is, really. I'm very excited about it. Really am.
Oh, wonderful. My next question, I think it's the last question. Would you describe Jupiter's part in Sophianic correction and perhaps give a summary of the Jupiterian features of self-navigation? And also, could you tell us how you arrived at these understandings? I know you make use of naked eye astronomy, but I'm curious as to what other methods you might employ.
Well, I use naked eye astronomy. I watch the sky. I watch the language of the planets and the stars. There's a language, there's a syntax as planets move through constellations, as they go into their retrograde cycles, as they conjunct. For instance, the syntax of this recent Venus-Jupiter conjunction. Wow. That was absolutely fantastic. And it was great to watch that and know how many people around the world must be looking at it without even, knowing what it means. I'll try to be brief and explicit. It's the most important issue that you raised. Jupiter plays an immense role in the correction of the divine Sophia. And want to point out, by the way, in case people might be confused by this, the Gnostics taught that the Earth is an organic planet captured in an inorganic system, and that the inorganic system, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, is the archontic world. It's the world, the heaven of the archons. So how could these archontic planets then be helpful to Sophia in making her correction? I mean, this is a natural question. Well, the Gnostic cosmological texts are very clear in telling us that the archons, from their inception, have no power whatsoever. The archons did construct the celestial mechanics of the extraterrestrial bodies. They did construct it, but they did it because she gave them the power to do so. They have no power of their own. The texts are extremely clear on this in a number of places. The only intelligence they have to construct and organize is given by her. So if you accept that premise, that cosmological premise, then you can accept that she can do whatever she wants to with the planets. And in her awakening, she can turn them to her own advantage in any way she likes. The correction of Sophia takes place in the apsides of Jupiter. Why is that? Because Jupiter is like the gyroscope. She is using Jupiter as the gyroscope. Now, when you have a massive ocean liner, like these pleasure ships especially, they have massive gyroscopes installed down in the hull of the ship. And that is so that even if they're going through rough waters, the ship will be totally steady because they have these 4,000 or 5,000 party makers on board. And these people want to, play ping pong and lay around the pool and get drunk in the lounge and go to the movies just like they do on land. And they don't want to be pushed, tossed around by the waves. So we know that it is a fact of nautical science that a massive gyroscope installed in a massive ocean liner will hold that ocean liner completely still and steady, even if it's going through quite rough waters. This is the purpose of Jupiter, is the gyroscope of Gaia's navigational system. And so it is also has functioned as the tugboat in certain respects. And I have shown that the interactions between the Earth and Jupiter have been instrumental since March of last year to position the Earth in such a way that she can undertake self-navigation. She undertakes self-navigation and correction. What does this mean? I'm daring to say that it literally means that the Earth, using its geophysical steam properties, which are the volcanic forces under the sea and under land, and using its sails, which are the ionospheric spinnaker, the ionospheric sail, will navigate on its own power. Up until now, it's been operating sort of on autopilot and carried in the capture of the rest of the planetary system. Correction means that Sophia liberates herself from the capture of the archontic planetary system. It doesn't mean that she leaves the system, although she can. It's possible that she might. I don't know. But she assumes self-navigation and self-direction. In order for her to do that without harming us and with the absolute minimum of disruption to the crew, passengers and crew, she has to proceed very, very carefully. Stabilization of the mothership is achieved through her interactions with Jupiter and the apsides of Jupiter, which lie on the ecliptic between 15 Aries and 15 Libra. And those of you who followed me plotting the Gaia navigation experiment are already aware of how meticulously I've done this, and how we are able to actually track this process. And in some respects, we are able to verify it by geophysical phenomena and atmospheric phenomena that are occurring. I would add this caveat, however. You have to realize how big the mothership is. You know, they say that a Titanic was a big ship. So imagine that if you're standing on the front of a boat like the Titanic, you're standing at the bow, you have your arms stretched out to the right and left, and it's as wide as a football field. Well,
Right.
that'd be a pretty big boat to be on, wouldn't it? You could move around on that boat. You could live on that boat and never even know you were on one. Now imagine that you're standing on the bow of a boat, right and left hand spread out, and the bow of the boat is as wide as the Atlantic Ocean, 3,200 miles wide. Imagine that. Then you're getting into the dimension of the mothership. So you might be asking, well, isn't this pure speculation? Isn't this pure fantasy? How would we know? It's difficult to know in certain respects that these things are actually happening because the mothership is so huge. You're like an ant. It's more like we're ants living on the deck of the Titanic.
Mm.
You see?
Yes.
But it is possible. It is possible, and I'm sure that over time, verification, objective verification, will come. So Jupiter is tremendously important in this, and it's what's happening right now. That is the indication of the relinkage to the pleroma through the spindle of the Pleiades, is shown by Jupiter converging with the apogee of the moon. Then Jupiter advanced to the Pleiades, then the moon advanced, the apogee advanced to the Pleiades, and that completes the process in September.
That soon?
Yeah, that's soon.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
So where do you think she's headed?
Well, she's headed a bit more down in the galactic arms. She, at the beginning of correction, she changed her pilot star to Canopus. We know that astronomers know that the pilot star for the solar system is Deneb, which is in the tail of the constellation of the Swan. That means to say that the entire solar system is moving through intergalactic space in the general direction of that star. And there's a lot of mythology connected with that. And this is an astronomical fact, by the way. But as soon as she undertook correction, her first thing was to dip down, because she's not floating on a stream, she's in a stream.
Right.
This is a picture that you have to get. She's in a river. She's not floating on a river. The galactic arms are a river. And she took a dip down into the river. And the orientation then of the entire solar system changed according to her change of direction. And it changed by about 3 degrees. And so now she's using Canopus in Argo. Canopus is the star that marks the rudder of the constellation Argo Navis, the celestial boat. So how appropriate is that?
Yeah. Wow. What a journey.
Yeah, it's the journey of living eternity. And it goes as long as she goes. And I don't know where she's going. She's not going. I don't think she's going to cut across the galactic limbs and try to float back into the
pleroma? You don't think she's
I don't think so. No, because then this experiment couldn't continue, because life in the animate, animal, and sentient forms we know cannot occur in the galactic core. And she's in love with this experiment, And she's in love with the potential of this experiment. So I think she's going to keep this experiment going by journeying around the galactic arms.
Are you saying she's in love with us, too?
Not exactly. No. She loves our genius, but she doesn't love us as such.
Ah.
Yeah. Not as far as I can tell. Yeah. Not as far as I can tell. But she is, you know, a very, she is an extremely compassionate and mother and a good caretaker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, John. I've appreciated this evening very much.
Thanks, Uranus. Just actually one final question, John.
Sure.
Troy McLaughlin theorizes that the original sun of the Earth was Saturn, and before Saturn and the Earth and Mars was captured by the current sun and the solar system. So in history, Saturn was very important to the Earth and may have been its polar star, perhaps as short as 20 to 26,000 years ago. A Sophia myth also states that the counterweight of the moon helps Sophia manage the bulkiness of her dense void body and hold her against the pull of the planetary system. Many listeners of your work know of the importance of the apogee and perigee of the moon in regards to Sophia's experiment. But the question is, how would you state the relationship of Sophia to the moon and Sophia to Saturn? Will the moon continue to accompany Sophia in her journey? And how important is the moon? Could Saturn also become... Could you elaborate on the moon, the companion of the Earth, and Saturn in relation to the Sophia myth?
Sure. I set out in the beginning of the Gaia navigation experiment the premise of the mythogenetic method, which is that we use a metaphor, in this case a navigational metaphor. We say the Earth is a ship, that's a metaphor. And then but we see if we can develop this metaphor imaginatively in such a way that it's verifiable. We don't speculate, we don't guess, but we see if we can test the imagination, if we can test the metaphor. So in this metaphor, the Earth, not the moon itself, but the barycenter system, that is the system of the apogee and perigee, is the steerage of the mother ship. She steers using the apogee and perigee points of the moon, and that will remain so. That's a part of her steering mechanism, the essential part. The story about Saturn is interesting because there is a place for development in FGS 2.0 or maybe FGS 3.0. I don't know. There is a place for development of a more elaborate understanding of what happened in the earlier stages of the solar system. Now, the Gnostic texts do say, and this is on the origin of the world and the hypothesis of the archons, that the first celestial realm that Sophia allowed the archons to create collapsed, because even though she gave them, it was like a playground, even though she gave them the tools and the ability to form this playground for themselves, they constructed it incompetently, and it collapsed. And that first archonic world system, which is called the stereoma, had Saturn at the center. But it was not. But Saturn was not strong enough to maintain the center of the system. So she gave them a second chance to create a system. But the second system, which is the one we're currently in, evolved after the so-called conversion of Sabaoth, or the conversion of the sun. So in the first system, the sun was not present. There was only Saturn at the center of the solar system, and then the boundary of the solar system was defined by the body of Sophia herself, which was a Tiamat or Ouroboros, encircling the boundaries of the solar system by her organic light. When that system collapsed, the sun joined with Sophia, and the sun became the central vortex of the system, and Saturn took the opposite role. Instead of being at the center of the solar system, it is now at the limit. In fact, the solar system only consists of the planets up until Saturn. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are not planets, but they are probes, probes constructed by the Pleroma in order to observe our experiment. They're not really planets. So the only planets of this solar system are the ones up to Saturn. So Saturn is now the bounding planet But in the first archonic world, it was the central planet. Finally, I just conclude by saying that the role of Saturn in Gaia's correction is defined by a metaphor. That Saturn is the light ship. You know that there are ships that have lighthouses on them. Lighthouses are not just constructed on rocks, but they're actually boats that have lighthouses on them. And Saturn is, as it were, the light ship of this experiment, of this correction process. And I haven't talked too much specifically about that, but I plan to do so in the near future as the role of the light ship now becomes easier to understand once the braiding linkage is established in the next 4 months. Once that braiding linkage is established, which allows Sophia to conduct our experiment on the terms she originally wished, then the light ship becomes, the role of the light ship, I think, becomes evident at that point.
Thank you, John. John, thank you for your time tonight, sir. Viktor Emil Frankl, author of the book Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. During Sophia's correction, one thing will become very evident. Humans will find that they will not be able to change circumstance and will need to adapt and change themselves. And your navigation briefings is a way for many to navigate these coming times." On behalf of Fox and all the members of the Time Monk Radio Forum, thank you, John. And in our tradition, may you and your family have many pies to come.
Well, thank you as well. It's been a pleasure as always, and a great educational experience into the bargain. So, see you around.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. This has
Thank
been
you.
an
Bye-bye.
amazing dialogue. Thank you for it.
Yes,
Thank you, John.
Certainly, my pleasure. The best to all. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.